Chapter 39. Bang, bang, bang. The sound of the axes hacking on the tree trunk rose and fell one after another. The axes were waved with great force and embedded deeply into the tree trunk. After a burst of small pieces of wood, the members of the exploration team shook the axes and pulled them out with great force. The tree trunk had been cut into a large enough gap, and the entire tree began to shake. The members of the logging team shouted loudly and gave a reminder. Then, a few of them exerted their strength and stepped on the tree trunk. The tree trunk creaked and then fell to the ground with a loud crash. Accompanied by the sound of countless branches being broken, the leaves also flew in all directions. Although the exploration team only brought a few axes, it greatly increased their efficiency and saved the members' physical energy consumption. Next, it was to saw the tree trunk into sections for easier transportation. These tree trunks had to be rolled to the camp for fine processing in the camp. The exploration team did not bring a saw. However, Zhenjin lent it to them. Zhenjin's saw came from the blade spider. The spider's hind legs were long and straight, and there was a row of dense spikes. This was a natural saw. The blade spider was a silver-level magical beast. The exploration team quickly experienced the power of a silver-level magical beast from another perspective. They worked together and used the blade spider's legs to saw through the thick tree trunk. It was as if they were using a sharp knife to easily cut white bread. The old scholar Tsang Su had rich experience in leading and commanding. Because Zhen Jin was in charge, he divided the people in his hands into two groups. One group was logging, and the other group was peeling the bark, tearing the inner side of the bark into thin thread. Every once in a while, the two groups would take turns to change the work content. This way, the team members could conserve their energy, rest, and maintain the progress of their work. In just one morning, the logging team had completed their mission beyond expectations. A large amount of wood, rolled in sections, was transported to the camp one after another and temporarily piled up in a corner. There were also the thin threads torn from the bark that had been smeared with potions. The lunch supply was increased, and almost everyone was extremely hungry. Bai Ye and Huang Zhao also returned at mealtime. They did not gain much, only a few birds and a pheasant. These gains were obviously incomparable to the manpower and time they had invested, but at least they had cleared the forest near the camp once again. To everyone's surprise, Zhen Jin also ordered that there would be a short nap after lunch. This had never happened before. This was actually a suggestion made by Tsang Su. The afternoon break could ensure the team members' efficiency in the afternoon. Although the logging work was over, there was still a lot of work to be done. A large number of tree trunks were chopped down to form wooden planks. This was the prototype of a short bough. Therefore, there were requirements for the length and thickness of the wooden plank. Even if the wooden board was placed in the original position of the tree trunk, it would be best if it was the core of the tree. This is the work of joinery. It would be great if there was a carpenter around, but the members of the exploration team were all amateurs, so they immediately showed their amateurish nature. Many tree trunks were destroyed, and although many planks were chopped out, they were all unqualified after Bai Ye's inspection. The unqualified planks could be used to set up traps for hunters. No matter how tattered the wood was, it could still be used to make a fire. After the fire, the charcoal and wood ash formed were also good resources with high practical value. Now that the exploration team had reached this stage, they needed all kinds of resources. They would never let go of the resources that they could get their hands on easily. The progress of the carpentry was quite slow, which made Zhen Jin more and more worried and impatient. Although he also knew that he could not be anxious. To be honest, Zidi's potion had indeed helped him a lot. It had saved him the most critical time. Moreover, Tsang Su's arrangements were also very reasonable and sufficient. The old scholar had already estimated the situation of failure. After the members of the exploration team gradually became familiar with this work, the loss of wood began to greatly decrease. One after another, qualified wooden planks were born, and there were more and more of them. When the number of wooden planks increased to a certain extent, Sang-Soo instructed everyone to start using the wooden planks to make short bows. This process was actually quite simple. They only needed to cut the wooden planks into thinner strips, forming a shape that was slightly thicker in the middle and slightly thinner at both ends. They also needed to cut notches at both ends to facilitate the hanging of the bowstring in the future. After Baya checked and confirmed that the short bows were made, they would be smeared with potion and placed in a dark corner to dry. After this work was done, many people started to clamor. They felt that they could become bow craftsmen. More people kept moving their fingers or kneading their arms, thighs, and other muscles. The pain and soreness made them grimace. Their bodies were already close to their limits, but there was still other work waiting for them. They needed to make a large number of arrows. There was usually a standard for the selection of arrow shaft. For the wood that met the standard, it would be cut into long cylinders, and then the surface would be smooth. On the exploration team side, of course, there was no mature processing process. The main material they used to make arrows was tree branches. The tree branches were as straight as possible, close to the length and thickness of a normal arrow. Baya instructed everyone to make arrows. First, they peeled off the skin of the tree branches to make the arrow shaft. Then, they carefully cut the feathers with a blade and stuck them with potion to make the arrow feathers. Finally, they roasted the arrowheads slightly to harden the wood after it was carbonized, and then sharpened them until they were fine. The arrows made in this way were far from being comparable to the regular military supplies. First of all, the material chosen for the arrow shafts was a notch worse. The material chosen for the arrow feathers was not of high quality and was completely shoddy. But don't despise it. There were too few feathers in the exploration team. Most of them came from the chicken feathers and bird feathers that Baya hunted today, so every single one had to be cherished. The only gratifying thing was that the potion that ZD had concocted on the spot was really sticky. As for the arrowheads, they were simply too shabby. There wasn't even an iron arrowhead. If they were really used, they would be scrapped after a few uses. The lethality was naturally very low, but it was still a threat to ordinary beasts. Apart from the making of the arrows, there were other jobs. For example, a large wooden shield, which was as tall as a person and relatively wide. It was assembled from tree trunks and vines, and stood on the ground to form an extremely simple and short curtain wall. This was also called a shield. A long time ago, when the humans attacked the castle, there were such defensive fortifications. By now, this kind of fortification had long been eliminated. Even if someone used it, they would at least put a layer of iron on the surface. Other than the shield, there was also a wooden spear. The members of the exploration team could hold a spear in both hands and assassinate the flying squirrels at a safe distance. However, this tactic was only slightly better than nothing, because everyone knew that the squirrels were very fast and could glide in midair. Their tails could adjust their direction in the air, and their bodies were very agile. What everyone was looking forward to was mainly the short bow. By evening, the torn bark had completely dried up. While admiring ZD's methods, the people began to knit the hemp rope. The method of knit the rope was also learned from Baya. There was a small trick involved. The main thing was to first divide a thin thread into two bundles. Each bundle rotated counterclockwise, but when the two bundles were combined, they rotated clockwise. This way, the woven rope would be tighter and would not spread out easily. The hemp rope was used as a bowstring. Each short bow was equipped with at least two bowstrings, one for regular use and one for spare. By the time they had dinner at night, the bowstrings had basically been made. Just like noon, dinner was also very sumptuous. There was also game, which became a rare flavor for everyone. The next morning, Zhenjin and the others all woke up early because they had an important thing to do: test the bow. After a night and ZD's medicine, the bow had already dried. Baya tried to grab the two ends of the bow with both hands and bend it forcefully. After seeing that the bow arm had bent into a big arc, he grinned and said, "Very good. It's even better than I imagined." Sang-Soo pondered and said, "Huang Zhao, I'll give you a mission. Break this bow arm, but you must use force slowly." Huang Zhao understood what Sang-Soo meant and immediately set to work. When the bow arm was bent to its limit, it immediately broke into two with a crack. Everyone saw it with their own eyes and immediately understood the limit of this simple bow arm. Sang-Soo estimated and said, "It seems that we can only use a hemp rope as the bowstring." No one had any objections. Sometimes there would be many hemp ropes combined to form a bowstring. But after experimenting, it was more appropriate to use a hemp rope for this kind of short bow arm's toughness and limit. Baya tied the bowstring. He was making a live knot, ingenious and reliable. Immediately, the hunter's son nocked an arrow, aimed at a distant target, and shot the arrow. Everyone opened their eyes wide. Obviously, the arrow that was originally heading straight ahead flew to the top left and then fell to the ground. The shooting range was more than 50 steps. It was very far from the target, who knew where it had gone. But no one showed any disappointment. Zhenjin even nodded slightly. He knew that this was just the beginning. The bow needed to be adjusted. The bow arm that was made was very rough and needed to continuously use tools, such as daggers, to continue working on the bow arm. At the same time, the bowstring and arrow had to be adjusted. Along with this process, the accuracy of the short bow would become stable and the shooting range would be greatly improved. Finally, after Baya's adjustment, the arrow successfully hit the target 100 steps away and the arrowhead pierced 2 fingers deep. Zhenjin was already very satisfied with this result. On one hand, this was not a composite bow, but a single bow. The bow arm and bowstring were all made of local materials and were not carefully selected. On the other hand, the arrow did not have an iron arrowhead. It was only sharpened after carbonization and handled very roughly. To be able to perform like this was already very good. Because Zhenjin did not ask for much. They were now in the forest, not the vast and empty terrain of the grassland, so the longbow was not suitable. The members of the exploration team were not outstanding archers. Most of them were forced to do something beyond their abilities. Don't expect them to have any accuracy beyond 100 steps. Due to the limitations of the environment and personnel, the effective range of the short bow can only be 100 steps. The key is, how many arrows can we shoot within this 100 steps? If we can shoot more than 3 arrows with a certain accuracy, then the short bow plan will be considered a success. Chapter 40. Even though it was only 3 arrows, it had a huge impact on the outcome of the battle. That was because one side was unharmed and was shooting from afar, while the other side was losing members. 1-on-1 and 2-on-1 on the battlefield were 2 completely different things. The so-called art of war had a common point: the use of various methods to create a situation where one side outnumbered the other, thus creating an advantage in terms of military strength. Moreover, the flying squirrels weren't undead. As long as they were natural creatures, they would have morale. For example, Zhenjin had directly killed the leader of the flying squirrels, causing the rest of them to collapse and flee in all directions. In fact, they couldn't shoot too many arrows. If they shot too many arrows, their physical strength would be greatly depleted. They were only temporary archers, so their physical strength should be allocated more to close combat. Otherwise, the gains wouldn't make up for the losses. Next, Zhenjin left the work of adjusting the bows to Baya. Huang Zhao and Lan Zhao only had a small part of leadership skills. At most, they could lead small teams to charge on the deck of the ship. As for Zhenjin, he didn't know how to adjust the bow himself. Sang-Soo and Zd were even worse. Baya, the son of a hunter, had ordinary strength. If he hadn't fallen to this island, he would have been too mediocre. However, under such circumstances, he was able to rely on his own talent to shine brightly. For him, this island was extremely dangerous, but at the same time, it also held great opportunities. In the end, I still have too few subordinate. Those who are slightly talented like Baya can stand out. Zhenjin sighed inwardly. Baya led a few people to adjust the bows. Of course, the rest of the people wouldn't be idle. Huang Zhao continued to hunt. His main goal wasn't to obtain food, but to target the wild birds and harvest their feathers. Lan Zhao continued to scout the surroundings of the flying squirrels. Wooden shields and hunter traps were made by people one after another. There were also hemp ropes woven from tree bark. The short ones were used for bowstrings, while the long ones were used for binding. For example, the production of shields. The storage of hemp ropes continued to increase. These things were unremarkable, but they were very practical. No one could estimate how long they would stay on this island, so they had to stock up on hemp rope as much as possible. According to Tsang Su's introduction, hemp rope had a wide range of applications. Other than its own function, hemp ropes could also be combined to weave a net. The net could be used to store things, and it could be used to form cloth and silk to cover the body. It could also be woven into straw shoes. Tsang Su was also involved. He provided an extremely crude loom. This type of loom was made with more than a dozen small wooden stakes inserted into the soil. The stakes were arranged in 2 rows. One of the rows of small wooden stakes was separated by a horizontal wooden stick to hold them in place. After the small wooden stakes were wound on the line, dozens of vertical lines were formed. Every time the wooden stick was lifted, half of the small wooden stake would be lifted, and then half of the vertical line would be lifted. At this time, the only horizontal line was inserted in the tilted angle. Once the vertical thread was put down, 1 horizontal thread and a dozen vertical threads were compacted together, completing the basic movement of weaving. This action was repeated dozens or hundreds of times, and a piece of cloth was successfully born. This kind of loom was extremely primitive, and its efficiency was completely incomparable to the looms in the empire. One was on the ground while the other was in the sky. A person could only get a small piece the size of but after spending half a day working. However, it did save a lot of manpower and material resources, and its efficiency was much higher than that of pure manual labor. The members of the exploration team who used these looms to work were all amazed by Tsang Su's profound knowledge. However, Tsang Su told them that this kind of loom was obtained when he was studying the information of the orcs. Compared to the human empire, although the orcs occupied the wilderness continent, they generally existed in the form of tribes. Their living standards and productivity were generally low. This kind of loom was common among the orcs. As for ZD, she was mainly responsible for making poison. Zhenjin told her clearly that he needed a poison that could dissipate naturally, or it could disappear by boiling, roasting, or other methods. Or rather, even if this poison existed, it would only be effective on flying squirrels and would not cause much harm to the human body. After all, Zhenjin needed food to hunt flying squirrels. If the poison was too strong, even if the flying squirrels were killed, the meat of the flying squirrels could not be eaten. For the entire exploration team, the losses would be far greater than the gains. The environment at the moment was extremely simple and crude, and ZD could only try. She made another request. She needed live flying squirrels for experiment. Zhenjin secretly set off and spied on the flying squirrels with Lan Zhao. Tsang Su stayed in the camp to command the deployment. After adjusting the bow, Baya led the team to start shooting again. In the evening, the leaders met again to exchange their findings. Zhenjin and Lan Zhao caught 3 live flying squirrels and handed them to ZD. Xian Zhao did not have any prey. Hunting did not rely on combat strength, and he also lost some iron arrowhead. These iron arrowheads were very precious, and they would be gone once they were used. However, it was not that they did not gain anything. Xian Zhao and his team failed to hunt, so they could only go further and try their luck. In the end, they accidentally found a small bamboo forest. Bamboo was a very excellent resource. Bamboo with bamboo joints was a natural water container. Bamboo could be made into bamboo rafts, and bamboo could be sharpened into trap. The third day. Shoot! Huang Zhao gave the order, and many arrows flew out with a so-so sound. More than a dozen simple and crude targets were set up 120 steps away. Concentric circles were drawn on the targets with charcoal, but the arrows rarely hit the targets, let alone a few circles. The circles on the targets were a little small, about the size of the flying squirrels. However, in a real battle, everyone had to shoot flying squirrels, and these flying squirrels could move. Therefore, the results of this kind of shooting were unacceptable. Your posture is not right. Straighten your back and straighten your arms. Steady, steady. Why are you shaking? Xian Zhao was the instructor. He frowned, and there was a huge pressure in his heart. In comparison, Zhen Jin was the best archer in the team. The second best was Bai Ye. This young man's archery was even better than Xian Zhao and the others. After all, for him, archery was a skill that he relied on to make a living. Hunters did not fight head-on when hunting. This was just a way for them to make a living. Besides hunting dogs, hunters used traps the most. They also used bows a lot. Excellent hunters would choose to retreat or stop when they encountered large beasts that they could not hunt. Xian Zhao and Lan Zhao were good at close combat. When shooting from a distance, they used crossbows more than bows. They were surviving on the ship, so they specially practiced archery. Xian Zhao's hunting results yesterday were a mess. Today, he was arranged by Zhen Jin to be the temporary instructor. In order to save his face, Xian Zhao worked very hard. When it came to training others, Xian Zhao was more reliable. Although his archery was a little worse than Bai Ye's. Bai Ye's archery relied more on his intuition and was purely unorthodox. At least Xian Zhao had been trained before and knew what the key to archery was. First, we have to practice individual assault. Then, we have to form a curtain of arrows to shoot. With our current archery skills, we can't even form the most basic curtain of arrows. Zhen Jin inspected the training and saw this situation. He was quite anxious, but he did not show it on the surface. Today, Bai Ye replaced Xian Zhao and was in charge of hunting. The main target was still wild birds. The exploration team needed more feathers to make arrow tails. No one expected him to hunt enough food. Individual hunting was very risky, and the efficiency was actually very low. Most of them depended on the weather and luck. In the entire empire, the life of hunters was actually very difficult. Therefore, as the saying went, those who hunt are not as good as those who herd, and those who herd are not as good as those who farm. Under normal circumstances, hunters did not have enough to eat. Compared to hunters and herdsmen, farmers lived the most stable lives and the quality of life was the most guaranteed. Hunters seemed to have a source of meat, but in fact, most of the mountains and forests were the territory of nobles. Hunters who poached without permission would be severely punished once they were caught. In the situation of the exploration team, they could only rely on large-scale hunting to satisfy their own food consumption. The day's training lasted from morning to night. After eating, the members of the exploration team were not in the mood to talk and laugh. They all fell asleep in their tents. In Zhen Jin's tent, Song Su reported the grim situation with a solemn expression. Lord Zhen Jin, we don't have much food left. It can be said that our consumption is very high. At this rate, we won't be able to last for more than a few days. Zhen Jin's expression was calm, and his mood was calm. Regarding this, he himself was very puzzled. In these 2 days, his originally anxious mood gradually calmed down just like that. He adapted to this kind of pressure and instead comforted Song Su, we have to train our archery skills. This matter can't be rushed. We can only grit our teeth and persevere. Without basic archery skills, it's useless to rashly start a war. This kind of hard training will indeed consume physical strength and increase the consumption of food. However, by consuming food to improve their archery skills, they would be able to reduce the number of casualties in future battles. This is very cost-effective. I understand, sir. Sang-Soo nodded. It's just that this way, our food consumption will be intense. Everyone knows this, and the team members are very worried. Zhen Jin smiled. Then tell them exactly how much food we have left. If necessary, let each of them see our food reserves with their own eyes. Sang-Soo's expression changed slightly, and he said in a deep voice, I understand, sir. The fourth day. At the shooting range. Although their arms were sore and even swollen, the members of the exploration team were all serious. They gritted their teeth and trained hard. They were all clear about the food reserves in the team and had a very clear understanding of their situation. Right now, they had to stake everything on one throw. If the hunt failed, what awaited them was death. Under this kind of pressure, everyone worked hard and did their best to practice their archery skills. Although the results of the early training were unsightly, after everyone got used to it, the situation of the arrows hitting the target improved greatly. It was very rare for arrows to hit the bullseye, but most of the arrows could hit the target. Seeing that the results of archery had stabilized, Huang Zhao immediately moved away the fixed target and replaced it with a moving target. These moving targets were short wooden stakes. The wooden stakes were tied with hemp ropes, and the other end of the ropes was hung on a high branch. After pulling the wooden stakes high, they let go and the wooden stakes swayed under the tree. Huang Zhao asked the team members to shoot the arrows on the wooden stakes. The results immediately slipped and became even worse than before. No one complained. Everyone knew that in actual combat, the flying squirrel's movements were faster and more variable than the wooden stake. Practice continuously. He cherished every breath he took. During lunch, the team members were silent, and the atmosphere was very solemn. Many people subconsciously frowned, constantly thinking and reflecting on what they could do to improve their archery skills. When they were resting in the tent, they also tried to draw their bows, even if they did not have a bow in their hands. After training, the team members rubbed each other's arms. Many people could not raise their arms. The swelling of their arms spread to everyone. Fortunately, there was the medicine provided by ZD. These medicines were made at the last minute. Originally, they were suitable for superhumans, but after diluting them, they were used on ordinary team members, and they still had a strong recovery effect. These medicines were used externally and when taken orally. After a night's rest, their arms would basically recover. During dinner, everyone was greeted by a plain soup. The scattered wild vegetables seemed to be seasoning. The team members' expressions changed, but they did not say anything. Everyone could understand the severity of the situation. Sang-Soo, come out for a moment. Zhen Jin's voice came from afar. Why is there only this for dinner? Zhen Jin seemed to be questioning Sang-Soo. Sir, there is not enough food. This is the only thing we can do. Sang-Soo answered Zhen Jin. Zhen Jin retorted, but I remember that there is still some food in reserve. It shouldn't be to this extent. Sir, these are the only dry rations left. They are for you and Lady ZD. Take them all out. Sir? Take them all out. If you don't eat, how will you have the strength to train and fight? This conversation made everyone's emotions fluctuate. Many of them were moved. Sir, please let us attack. That night, a team member took the initiative to find Zhen Jin and asked to attack. However, Zhen Jin rejected this request. Training. You guys still need more training. The fifth day. Training, and more training. In the evening, Zhen Jin checked the results and was gratified to find that 5 out of 10 arrows hit the target. The moving target was relatively large, much larger than a real flying squirrel. However, this result had already reached Zhen Jin's standard. He had never expected to train every team member into a godly archer. It was impossible in a short time. Everyone's aptitude actually determined the upper limit of their shooting skills. However, the arrow curtain could make up for the lack of accuracy. This kind of shooting skill could form a qualified arrow curtain. In the afternoon, Sang-Soo also came to persuade Jin-Jin. "Sir, we can attack now." "Wait a little longer." Jin-Jin became more determined. This kind of willpower surprised even himself. Chapter 41. The Sixth Day. After breakfast, Jin-Jin faced the crowd and said, "We just finished our remaining rations." Everyone was silent as they stood ramrod straight. They were all mentally prepared for this outcome. Jin-Jin stood in front of the crowd, his eyes sharp as he scanned the crowd. "Now, who still doesn't understand our situation, take a step forward." No one moved. They stood still. Everyone's face was grim, and their chests seemed to be boiling hot magma. It was a battle intent that had been accumulated for a long time, a strong desire to live. Very good. Everyone is smart. We all understand what will happen if we lose. These days, Lan Zhao has carried out a comprehensive investigation. Other than the pterosaurs, there are no other suitable targets. Today, if we defeat them, they will be our food. If we lose, we will be their food. I, Jin-Jin, as a holy knight and the only heir of the 100 Needles clan, will be with you. I will lead you through difficulties and obstacles to reap victory. Follow me and let us obtain glory. The morale was high and the will was strong. The team set off. Soon, they arrived at the designated battlefield. This battlefield was carefully arranged. The most conspicuous thing was the short obstacles made of vines and bamboo. These obstacles were connected to each other, forming a long line of defense. If the pterosaurs wanted to cross the line of defense, they had to fly. This gave the team a good opportunity to shoot. There were a total of 3 lines of defense. Under normal circumstances, rivers were natural obstacles that didn't require manpower to set up, which was the best. However, there were no rivers nearby. Secondly, the rivers on this island were more dangerous, and there were often wild pythons and green vines. Jin-Jin wasn't the only one who had encountered this kind of gold-level magic plant. Sang-Soo's exploration team had also encountered it a few times and paid the price with blood. Under Jin-Jin's command, Lan Zhao moved forward alone. His back quickly disappeared from everyone's sight. Most people formed a battle formation. The battle formation was very simple. It was a horizontal row. Such a formation was convenient for long-range firepower. Sang-Soo and ZD stood behind the row, beside Jin-Jin. Jin-Jin began to pray silently. "Shringming Emperor, my God, you are wise and mighty, always able to grasp the opportunity to win on the battlefield. You are the God of knights, the God of war, and the God of victory. Please bless me with victory, and I will add a glimmer of brilliance to your throne with faith and glory, and with the blood of my mortal enemy. O God, please listen to my call." The god did not respond. Jin-Jin sighed inwardly. Usually, when facing a battle, the temple knights would pray. The Shingming Emperor would also respond by bestowing divine spells upon the holy knights. However, ever since Jin-Jin woke up, he had prayed many times, but the Shingming Emperor did not respond. It was because of this that Jin-Jin did not pray in front of everyone, because if there was no divine spell, it would leave a bad impression on others. They would think that Jin-Jin, a temple knight, was not favored and protected by the god. In this way, before the battle even began, the morale of his side would be shaken. The result was not out of Jin-Jin's expectations. He was also glad that he had made a wise choice. The early morning sun shone through the rosy clouds. The forest was gradually bathed in the sunlight, and the dark green gradually became brighter. The air was still icy cold. When everyone breathed, they could exhale white mist that was visible to the naked eye. As time passed, the chirping of birds became more and more frequent. Suddenly, a flock of birds flapped their wings in front of them, leaving the canopy and flying into the air. Lan Zhao's figure once again appeared in front of everyone. He was running with all his might, and behind him was a large group of flying squirrels, squeaking. Among them, there were many that emitted the aura of bronze-level magical beasts. There was a slight commotion in the front line, and then it immediately returned to silence. Zhen Jin's eyes flashed with a flash of light, and his spirit was slightly lifted. Lan Zhao's provocation this time was very successful. The next moment Zhen Jin shouted, "Get ready!" The exploration team members were already prepared. Upon hearing this, they immediately drew their arrows and knocked them on their bowstrings. Their movements were in sync. They drew their bows one after another, but did not shoot. "Shoot!" Zhen Jin shouted again. The team members immediately let go of their bows. In an instant, the bowstrings vibrated, and all the arrows flew out. Lan Zhao's footsteps did not stop. When he saw the arrows flying towards him, he immediately fell to the ground and rolled with the momentum. A flying squirrel leader missed and hit the ground. The grass and small pieces of soil splattered everywhere, immediately creating a small mud pit. Lan Zhao quickly got up from the inertia of the roll. This time, he had already raised his shield. This shield had been prepared for a long time, and many sides were placed on the ground. None of the arrows hit Lan Zhao's shield. The arrow curtain gathered into one layer, screening out many of the flying squirrels. A flying squirrel leader pounced on Lan Zhao's back. Lan Zhao heard the movement and suddenly turned around, raised his shield, and swept the flying squirrel away with a bang. "Get ready, shoot!" Zhen Jin shouted again when he saw the flying squirrel crossing the vine barrier. More than a dozen arrows once again formed a thin layer of arrow curtain. Among them were a few short iron arrows shot out by the crossbows. The arrow curtain drew a gentle arc in the air and accurately landed in the swarm of flying squirrels. A few wooden arrows hit Lan Zhao's shield and the leather armor on his body, but did not cause any damage to the latter. The crossbows were in the hands of people with good shooting skills, so they would not hit Lan Zhao. The remaining arrowheads were all made of wood. There were no iron arrowheads, but the tip of the wooden arrow shaft had been burned black, carbonized, and sharpened. Of course, these arrowheads could not cause much damage to Lan Zhao, and they were not much of a threat to the flying squirrel leader. However, they could still kill ordinary flying squirrels. After this layer of arrow curtain fell, many more flying squirrels fell to the ground. Some died on the spot, while others were injured and screaming. After 2 shots, more than a dozen flying squirrels had lost their ability to fight and died in the midst of their charge. The swarm of flying squirrels began to scatter. Most of them were still chasing after Lan Zhao, while a small number of them directly attacked the formation. "Get ready," Zhen Jin said again. "Shoot!" After the third volley, everyone's movements began to be uneven. Although the arrow curtain formed in the air, it was clearly not as dense as before. However, because both sides were close to each other, the arrows still caused a lot of damage to the flying squirrels. Bai Ye and Huang Zhao aimed their crossbows at the flying squirrel leader at the same time. Although the flying squirrel leader was hit by an arrow, it was only slowed down. It was not injured. Instead, its ferocity was aroused and its speed increased. There were 2 flying squirrels in total. One of them had set its sights on Lan Zhao, while the other pounced on the formation. "Fight freely," after Zhen Jin gave the order. He immediately pulled out his dagger and threw it with both hands. The 2 flying squirrel leaders were stabbed by the dagger at almost the same time. After they fell to the ground, they rolled a few times due to inertia and then stopped moving. Bright red blood quickly flowed out from the fatal wound in their eye sockets and spread to the surrounding grass. At this distance, they were already within the range of Zhen Jin's flying dagger attack. Zhen Jin's physical fitness was astonishing. The strength of his throwing arm was much stronger than that of a crossbow. Without their leader, the flying squirrels immediately fell into a panic. The team members shot freely. Only a few flying squirrels managed to reach the team members, but they were then stabbed to death by a few wooden spears. After struggling for a while, the few remaining flying squirrels scattered in all directions. Phew, we won. Those 2 flying squirrel leaders have died at the hands of Lord Jinjin. Lord is mighty. Lan Zhao returned to the formation with his shield. There were wooden arrows stuck in the shield and his shoulder armor. Jinjin only needed to sweep his gaze to know that Lan Zhao was not injured at all. He patted Lan Zhao's shoulder and said, "You did well." Everything was under Lord Jinjin's command. Lan Zhao bowed and said respectfully. Everyone knew that the key to victory in this battle was still Jinjin. His flying dagger technique was amazing. At the same time, he had taken care of the 2 most threatening flying squirrel leaders and completely destroyed the morale of the flying squirrels. "Let's rest for a while. We will continue hunting," Jinjin ordered. "Yes, Lord Jinjin," the team members answered loudly. Their morale was higher than before the start of the battle. The way everyone looked at Jinjin was also different from before. Before this, everyone still had doubts and worries in their hearts. After all, everyone knew that Jinjin was staking everything on a single throw to hunt the flying squirrels. No one knew what the outcome would be. Even if Jinjin was a noble and a holy knight, there was no guarantee that the hunt would be a success. If it failed, the entire expedition team would collapse and be destroyed. As the leader, Jin Zhen would bear the first responsibility that could not be shirked. But now that the first official hunt was a complete victory, the worries in everyone's hearts were swept away. Before this, they still had doubts about Jinjin's decision, but now they felt that it was wise and decisive. The Lord Jinjin is a holy knight after all. Bai Ye's eyes flashed. "Yes, to be able to be under the command of the Lord Jinjin is truly my fortune," Huang Zhao sighed. "Following the Lord Jinjin, we will definitely be able to set sail again." Everyone whispered to each other, looking at Jinjin with reverence. This small victory allowed them to truly acknowledge Jinjin's leadership. This was because Jinjin had fulfilled his promise. He could really lead them to victory and obtain glory. It was not just empty talk. "My lord, I knew that all of this wouldn't be a problem for you." ZD, who was beside him, also revealed a smile. Her purple crystal eyes revealed traces of adoration. Sang Su exhaled a mouthful of turbid air and said to himself, "With this, the entire exploration team will be safe." Their previous situation was like being on the edge of a cliff, with one foot hanging in the air. Now that they had achieved a complete victory, although they did not replenish much food, the results had swept away everyone's worries. The entire team became closer, tightly surrounding Jinjin, the only core. However, just as the morale was high and they were celebrating, a strange sound suddenly came from the forest in the distance. The sound of squeaking could be heard without end. The flying squirrels that had fled had actually attracted a large group of people. "Ah, so many flying squirrels, they're charging over. How did they alarm so many flying squirrels? We're only at the periphery." For a moment, the expedition team was in a panic. "Ah!" Jinjin laughed loudly. Chapter 42. The panicked members of the exploration team were attracted by Jinjin's laughter. Jinjin immediately shouted, "I'm here. Why are you panicking? No matter how many flying squirrels there are, they will only be our food. Listen to my orders. Reorganize the formation and kill all these flying squirrels." "Yes, sir." Everyone answered loudly. The front line quickly recovered. Jinjin looked into the distance, and his pupils could not help but shrink. His physical fitness was higher than ordinary people, so he could see more clearly than ordinary people. At this moment, with a hurried glance, he saw 7 flying squirrel leaders and hundreds of ordinary flying squirrels swarming out. "I'm afraid all the flying squirrels are moving in full force?" As expected, it's hard to predict the nature of a beast. Jinjin had no intention of retreating at all. This situation was within his expectations. Before the hunt, Jinjin and the others had predicted many situations. The worst-case scenario was that Lan Zhao had alarmed the entire colony when he first attracted the flying squirrels. Now that Jinjin had obtained a small victory, he had increased his prestige, consolidated his position, and raised the morale of the entire team. It could be said that after the previous small victory, the entire team was completely different from before. This was already not bad. "Get ready, shoot," Jinjin shouted. When everyone heard the order, their faces were cold, and they all knocked their arrows and drew their bows. A thin layer of arrow curtain covered the flying squirrels, and they immediately fell to the ground. There were many flying squirrels attacking, and they were very densely packed. Therefore, the result of this round of volley was the highest in history. However, the flying squirrel group was relatively large, and none of the flying squirrel leaders died. Instead, the flying squirrels were more ferocious. They burst into squeaking sounds, and the speed of their attack seemed to have increased. Many people's faces were a little pale. After this round of volley, they understood the situation. There were many flying squirrels. Even if they shot 7 or 8 times, they might not be able to kill all of them. Moreover, at this distance and the speed of the flying squirrels' attack, not to mention 7 or 8 volleys, even 5 or 6 volleys would not be enough time. Soon, the second volley was shot. The third volley was shot. "Fight freely," Jinjin ordered after that. The arrow curtain made up for the lack of accuracy to a large extent. But now that the distance was extremely close, the accuracy of the archers would be greatly increased, and firing in unison would instead limit their performance. This was especially true for outstanding shooters. Whoosh! The flying arrows streaked across the sky and shot into the group of rats. The rats were squeaking noisily and were abnormally ferocious. There were so many of them that they didn't seem to have lost much. The rat swarm was right in front of him, bringing him immense pressure. Many people couldn't help but feel their hearts beat wildly. Their movements changed, and they lost their usual standard. Some people knocked an arrow several times before knocking it, while others dropped their arrows and only released an empty string. Subconsciously, Huang Zhao used all her strength to break the bow and threw away the broken bow in her hand angrily. "This stupid bow!" He cursed, and immediately pulled out a short bow. Because the short bows were crudely made, everyone had a spare short bow with them in mind. As for the crossbow, its firing speed could not be compared to a short bow. When the battle started, there was no time to rewind it, so it could only be set aside. Jinjin continued to shoot arrows, hitting the target every time. However, the power of the short bow was too weak, and the weight was too low. After shooting many times, Jinjin clearly felt that the short bow in his hand had loosened. He immediately threw away the short bow in his hand and changed to another spare bow. In a short period of time, Jinjin had already changed 3 short bows. He alone had killed more than 20 flying squirrels. However, there were still a lot of flying squirrels left. There were at least 50 of them. This was more than 5 times the number of exploration team members. It was fine if it was just ordinary flying squirrels, but the key was that there were a total of 7 flying squirrel leaders, and none of them had died. This was a headache. Even the powerful iron arrows fired from the crossbow could not hurt these flying squirrel leaders, let alone the short bows. Jinjin felt as if there was a huge rock pressing down on his heart. He knew very well that once this group of rats charged in, the exploration team would suffer heavy losses. The flying squirrel leader at the front entered the range of Jinjin's flying dagger. In an instant, the young man's eyes flickered, and his arm suddenly shook. The dagger pierced through the air. It was so fast that everyone could only see a flash of light. The light accurately hit the flying squirrel leader. The flying squirrel leader was originally flying in the air, but after being stabbed by the dagger, it was sent flying at an even faster speed. After falling to the ground far away, it did not move at all. When everyone saw this scene, their hearts trembled, but they did not have time to cheer. This was because the swarm of rats did not stop at all. The other flying squirrel leaders charged into the front line. They were all bronze magical beasts. After crashing into the bodies of the exploration team members, they used their claws and huge front teeth to bite crazily. The exploration team members who had been brutally killed fell to the ground one after another. Grass, leaves, and branches flew out from the corpses, but there was no blood or minced meat. It turned out that the ones standing at the front were all puppets. These puppets were stuffed with straw and made into a human shape. Then, they used the potion that ZD had made at the last minute to fool the flying squirrel's sense of smell. Sang-Soo had long discovered through dissection that the flying squirrel's vision was not outstanding. They mainly relied on their sense of smell. The flying squirrel's intelligence was not high either, so these puppets successfully attracted a wave of attacks. A large number of ordinary flying squirrels also pounced on these grass and wood puppets. Those with more puppets could attract more than 10 flying squirrels, and those with fewer could attract 5 or 6. Seeing the group of rats gathered together, Zhen Jin decisively ordered, "Set fire." ZD had been prepared for this moment before the battle began. She immediately took action and threw out the potion. The potion bottle shattered on the rock, and the potion inside fell to the grass, mixing with the previous potion. In an instant a weak flame burned. Then, the flame expanded into a fire snake. With a leap, it spread out and instantly burned a wall of fire at the front line. The puppets in the wall of fire immediately burned and emitted thick smoke. Some of the flying squirrels were burned until they screamed miserably. More of them were choking on the thick smoke until their snot and tears flowed down their faces. Their sharp sense of smell made their pain double. Almost all of the flying squirrels were fleeing in all directions in a panic. The pressure that the exploration team faced plummeted. This was because even if there were still flying squirrels rushing toward them, there were not many of them. Moreover, they were fleeing to avoid the flames. What greeted them were arrows. Almost half of the flying squirrels were hit and fell on the way. Baiya, Huang Zhao, and Lan Zhao were performing very well. Zhen Jin, however, did not make a move. He was focused and motionless like a statue. Suddenly, a leader of the flying squirrels broke through the wall of fire and appeared in his field of vision. Without any hesitation, Zhen Jin shot out a flying dagger almost at the same time, hitting the leader of the flying squirrels in the eye. After the leader of the flying squirrels fell to the ground, it rolled a few times and died immediately. However, just as this leader of the flying squirrels fell to the ground, the rest of the flying squirrels rushed out of the wall of fire. None of them were on fire. Ordinary flames could do nothing to them. Even the thick smoke only made them feel uncomfortable. The leaders of the flying squirrels all rushed over. Seeing this scene, Sang-Soo and ZD's expressions changed. There were still as many as 4 of the remaining flying squirrels. These were all bronze-level magical beasts. Even though Lan Zhao and Huang Zhao were also bronze-level warriors, it was still very dangerous for them to face off against one of the flying squirrels alone. Humans and beasts were different. The battle prowess of the human races extraordinaires mostly came from the use of battle energy and magic. However, in this environment, they were unable to use battle energy. Even though battle energy could subtly strengthen the physique of the human race's extraordinaires, this physique was inferior to that of magical beasts. Compared to beasts, humans were born with delicate skin and fragile bones. Huang Zhao and Lan Zhao could not compare to these flying squirrels with their physique alone. Even after the flying squirrels died, ordinary swords could not cut through their skin and bones. Lan Zhao and Huang Zhao were already in such a state. The other ordinary members were not a match for the flying squirrels. Once the flying squirrels charge into the crowd, there will definitely be a large number of casualties. Our only hope is Zhen Jin. Let's see if this holy knight can quickly kill these flying squirrels. Sang-Soo's eyes flashed with worry. He had a clear understanding of the current situation. Now is not the time to continue hiding your strength, my lord. Sang-Soo stared at Zhen Jin, encouraging him from the bottom of his heart. He was an intelligent person. He understood that in this kind of island, he could only rely on the strong to have more hope of survival. Because of this, he had taken the initiative to plan and promote the whole exploration team to rely on Zhenjin. Zhenjin took a deep breath. He knew that everyone was waiting for him to display his abilities. However, he could not use his battle energy. The battle was imminent, and Zhenjin did not have much time left. He only had one chance to use his flying daggers. Then I'll get rid of all of you in one go. Zhenjin's gaze was sharp and resolute. He reached into his bosom, holding 2 daggers in each hand. In the next moment, he shook his arms, and 4 daggers shot out at the same time. The force of a flying dagger was far more powerful than that of a crossbow. At the same time, each flying dagger was unusually accurate, and they hit their targets in the blink of an eye. Ah! Sang-Soo had just opened his mouth to cry out in surprise when he saw the flying squirrels fall to the ground. Zhenjin had already secured victory. It's done. Zhenjin was excited. His expression was as firm as steel, and his expression did not change. The muscles in his arms trembled uncontrollably. Zhenjin had used all his strength in the attack just now, fully displaying the exquisite skills brought about by his memory recovery. A strong numbness and soreness permeated his arms. Since the start of the battle, Zhenjin had first shot a large number of arrows, then threw flying daggers. In order to kill the flying squirrels, Zhenjin had used all his strength every time he threw a flying dagger. At this point, he had basically reached the limit of the youth's physical strength. It was important to note that these flying daggers were all ordinary weapons. The reason why he had been able to kill the flying squirrels was all because of Zhenjin's astonishing accuracy at their fatal weaknesses, as well as the terrifying speed and strength of his crazy throwing. It's done. 4 hits in 1 hit. These few flying squirrels were unable to force out Lord Zhenjin's true strength. Sir is really too strong. Everyone's morale was greatly boosted. Just as they began to cheer, one of the flying squirrels that had fallen to the ground suddenly came back to life. It sprinted on the ground, its speed so fast that it left a faint afterimage behind it. At the same time, its life force completely erupted. It was no longer bronze, but dark iron. Be careful! ZD screamed. This was a rather cunning flying squirrel. Its true strength was dark iron, but it had disguised its bronze aura. It had a unique method to conceal its aura and hide from Lan Zeo's detection. It was the leader of the flying squirrels. At this moment, Zhenjin once again felt the aura of death. Speaking of which, he had killed many magical beasts. Silver-ranked blue wolf, monkey-tailed brown bear, and blade spider. But killing the blue wolf was because the timing was too good, with the help of the wild python green vines in the river. The monkey-tailed brown bear took advantage of the fact that the brown bear was heavily injured. Even so, Zhenjin had almost died. His life was almost saved. After killing the blade spider, the spider had become careless. At the same time, Zhenjin had mutated and hit the spider's vital point. In terms of strength, Zhenjin was definitely not a match for the silver spider. The human body was rather fragile. Compared to beasts, humans did not have sharp claws and teeth, thick fur, strong physiques, and bones that were as hard as iron. Usually, humans could not even outrun dogs, breathe underwater like fish, or fly in the air like bird. In terms of strength, Zhenjin was able to suppress the bronze leader, which made Sang-Soo very surprised. He guessed that Zhenjin might have the cultivation of a gold rank. The greatest advantage of humans was their intelligence. Humans could use their intelligence to create tools and use them. Humans could create swords that were comparable to the claws and teeth of beasts. Humans had also researched magic and battle energy to increase their own strength. But on this island, low-level magic and battle energy were forbidden. Magical beasts could not use their natural abilities, but they still retained their strong and fierce physique. Without battle energy and magic, the natural weakness of the human body was immediately exposed. So, a dark iron-level flying squirrel leader could of course pose a fatal threat to Jinjin. It is much faster than me, and is extremely agile. Even if a normal sword slashed at it, it would not cause any effective damage. But in this regard, I still have a weapon made from the spider's blade. But what is truly frightening is not its agility, nor its claws and teeth, but the terrifying electric current it can release. Jinjin frowned. When danger came, he realized that he had an excellent quality of a battle-hardened warrior. The more dangerous the situation, the faster he thought, and the clearer his thoughts. He had already tested the flying dagger just now, and it could not hurt the dark iron-level flying squirrel leader. The spider's blade in Jinjin's hand was the best weapon to kill it, but at the same time, the electric current released by the flying squirrel could also take Jinjin's life in an instant. Unless I can summon battle energy in an instant, I can only defend against the electric current with battle energy protecting my body. A ferocious look flashed in Jinjin's eyes. Battle energy. Battle chi, he really needed battle chi. Xingming Emperor, my God! Listen to the prayers of your believers, let me awaken my past memories, let me regain control of my battle energy. Jinjin screamed in his heart. But God still did not respond. Damn it! Jinjin gritted his teeth. Without battle energy, he could not defend against the electric current. Both sides in the battle were strong in offense and weak in defense. It all depended on who could successfully launch a fatal attack on the opponent. Closer. Even closer. Roar. Just as Jinjin was about to charge forward, he suddenly heard a mysterious beast roar. There are other magical beasts. Wait, this beast roar is somewhat familiar. In the next moment, Jinjin was suddenly stunned. Jinjin sensed that there was a small round ball hidden in the depths of his heart. This small ball was only the size of a thumb, but it was bright red in color. Its surface was not smooth, like an extremely delicate walnut, with extremely fine and crisscrossing lines. But in terms of texture, it was faintly transparent like a crystal and seemed to be shining from the inside out. The bright red ball trembled slightly, bursting forth with an invisible force. This powerful force seeped into his blood and quickly spread throughout Jinjin's body, constantly shaking Jinjin's chest. The bloody light of the small ball was rapidly diminishing. Jinjin's arms were originally extremely sore, but with the influx of this force, his arms quickly recovered, and his muscles bulged and expanded rapidly. Jinjin's clothes and vambraces were stretched until they creaked. Although he was covered by clothes, Jinjin could clearly feel the thick black hair. His bones and muscles had transformed from human arms into a pair of bare arms. In just an instant, Jinjin's arms not only recovered, but they were also several times stronger than before. This feeling? Jinjin's heart shook violently. This feeling was clearly the same as when his hands mutated when he attacked the silver spider. But this time, it wasn't his hands that had mutated. Instead, it was his arms that had mutated. Without too much time to think about it, Jinjin took out a dagger and threw it with all his strength. Bang! There was a slight explosion. It turned out that the youth's swing was too violent, and it directly blew up the air. The flying dagger pierced through the air, and actually made a sharp whistling sound. Everyone saw a bright silver line flash through the air, accurately piercing through the black ironhead rat, and then its speed greatly decreased, and it deeply embedded itself into the grass. The charging black ironhead rat fell backwards, and fell to the ground, motionless. Its entire head had been pierced, and its blood quickly soaked the surrounding grass. The battlefield was silent. Chapter 43. There was no longer a single rat on the battlefield. The rats panicked and collapsed, scattering in all directions. Victory! This is a great victory. Jinjin! Huang Zhao and Lan Zhao took the lead, and everyone raised their arms and cheered. This is a holy night. Song Su sighed and was curious. But what happened just now? His entire arm grew bigger. Is it some kind of secret technique? Could it be that he can use battle chi? Did he use some kind of method to temporarily break through the suppression of the island's environment? What is the price? What level of battle chi does he have? Golden battle chi? Although Zhenjin had clearly told Sang-Soo that he could not use battle chi. But at that time, Zhenjin had just taken charge of the exploration team. Sang-Soo believed that Zhenjin did not trust the others at that time, so when he asked, Zhenjin hid his true strength. ZD was silent. She only cast her admiring gaze on Zhenjin. Everyone knew that if the black iron head rats rushed into the crowd, there would definitely be heavy casualties. However, Zhenjin relied on his own strength to save everyone. Without a doubt, he was a hero. From the beginning to the end, he was in control of the battle. He was a qualified leader. The members of the exploration team were all happy and proud that they could be led by Zhenjin. Zhenjin frowned slightly. The strange feeling disappeared, just like the last time. The mysterious invisible power also dissipated, and the young man's arms returned to normal. At the same time, a strong sense of emptiness enveloped his entire body. Exhaustion was like a tide, continuously attacking him. Zhenjin kept his expression unchanged, trying his best to hide his emptiness and exhaustion. At the same time, he was glad that this time, the mutation of his arms was hidden under his armor and clothes and was not exposed. Otherwise, he would have to explain it to others. The feeling of relief quickly dissipated, and a strong sense of doubt surged into his heart. It seems that the source of my mutation is the blood-red ball in my heart. What is it? Why does it feel like the core of a magical beast? Thinking of this, the teenager laughed at himself. How could a human have a magic crystal? Only magical beasts had crystal cores. Zhenjin scanned the surroundings as the cheers of the crowd grew louder and louder. He suppressed the doubts in his heart and gave the order to clean up the battlefield. The flames burned fiercely, but with the help of ZD's medicine, the fire was quickly extinguished. Huang Zhao and the others were searching the charred battlefield. Occasionally, he would stop and pick up a piece of pterosaur's corpse. Due to the fire, the flying squirrel's corpse was completely charred, and its surface was carbonized. After Huang Zhao patted the corpse, the charcoal on the surface of the flying squirrel's corpse fell off piece by piece, revealing the cooked red meat inside. The yellow algae took a deep breath, and a rich meaty aroma entered his nostrils. Another good piece of meat. Huang Zhao beamed. She swept her eyes over the battlefield and sighed from the bottom of her heart. This is my favorite hunting method. Over the past few days, he had been in charge of hunting alone. There were almost no results. The survival skills of a hunter were not that easy to master. Huang Zhao had always made a living on the sea. The experience of hunting in the forest reminded him of the difficult and clumsy times when he had just boarded the ship. On the other side, Lan Zhao was dealing with the only dark iron-level flying squirrel leader. Only half of the flying squirrel's blood had been collected. After Lan Zhao dealt with it, he had a thought and picked up the dagger that had killed the dark iron-headed flying squirrel. Looking at the dagger, the blue-green algae's pupils couldn't help but shrink slightly. The tip of the dagger was completely deformed, and he could not see any sharpness. This ordinary dagger has the power to kill a dark iron-level magical beast just by throwing it. Lan Zhao looked at Zhenjin, the respect in his eyes growing stronger. Cleaning up the battlefield was a great harvest. Everyone was beaming with joy. The bloodstains on the battlefield, as well as the flying squirrel meat that was completely burnt and inedible, were all taken care of. No other ferocious beasts would be attracted by the smell of blood and meat. The exploration team returned to camp victorious and continued to deal with the spoils of war. At night, a bonfire was lit, and everyone sat in a circle, discussing the day's harvest. Seeing so much food with their own eyes, the team members' hearts were completely at ease. A completely deformed dagger was passed around in everyone's hands. It really is an ordinary dagger, and it killed a dark iron-level magical beast just like that. Lord Jinjin is really strong. I think he must have activated his fighting aura at that moment. Otherwise, how could he have such a terrifying power? I really want to know Lord Jinjin's true strength. Anyway, if it's not bronze or dark iron level, he's at least a silver knight with silver fighting aura. Silver fighting aura. At this age, Jinjin is really a genius. It could also be gold. After all, none of us have seen Sir Jinjin's fighting aura with our own eyes. If it's gold, then it's even more terrifying. Following such a person, our future will definitely be bright. The reason we can be under Sir Jinjin's command now is because of the shipwreck. If it were any other time, how would it be possible? If we can always follow Sir Jinjin in the future, when Lord Jinjin becomes the Lord of White Sand City, I might be able to become an official of White Sand City. Damn it, I don't want anything else. I just want to be a guard at the city gate. In the past, when I entered the city, I was always troubled. In the future, I will guard the gate and make things difficult for others. It's fun. No one knew whose idea it was, but it caused everyone to burst into laughter. The success of the hunt allowed Jinjin to gain everyone's recognition. The entire exploration team had always thought that Jinjin's future was very bright. People always sought advantages and avoided disadvantages. Many people began to openly express their intention to follow Jinjin. This would never have happened in the past. This is the harvest of the other layer. Sang-Soo sat in a corner and listened to everyone chatting and laughing. He understood in his heart. His gaze was also focused on the dagger in the other person's hand. Recalling the scene on the battlefield, Sang-Soo also secretly guessed. At that moment, Jin's arms clearly swelled, and then exploded with a terrifying power. The bloodline of the 100 Needles family originates from the legendary magical beast, the Golden Needle Queen Bee. This bloodline is not praised in terms of power. Did he use some kind of chi secret technique? In the end, the dagger was passed into Bai Ya's hands. Bai Ya looked at the dagger, his eyes shining with the light of hope. This is a knight. I also want to become such a person. Hey Bai Ya, are you done looking at it? If you're done, return it to me. This dagger is very important. From now on, it will be my family's family heirloom. Huang Zhao giggled. Bai Ya could only reluctantly return the dagger to Huang Zhao. No matter which continent, every race worshipped the strong. And this kind of worship could easily turn into loyalty. It seems that Huang Zhao and Lan Zhao, these two brothers, have already decided to completely rely on Lord Jinjin and strive to become his retainers. Sang-Soo said meaningfully to ZD. ZD sat next to Sang-Soo. She raised her head and glanced at the people around the bonfire, then began to shake the potion in her hand. These two brothers' aptitudes are not good. If they don't have a chance in the future, I'm afraid that bronze rank is their limit. But according to my understanding of Lord Jinjin, he will not mistreat any of his followers. At this point, ZD looked at Sang-Soo and added, "It doesn't matter if this follower is extraordinary or not." Sang-Soo immediately understood the meaning behind ZD's words. He smiled bitterly and shook his head. Old trees, no matter how much sunlight they bask in, they will not radiate a new spring. The potion in ZD's hand gradually changed color. She stood up. I still have things to take care of. ZD returned to her tent, while Jinjin pondered in his tent. His face was full of distress. I still can't sense it. Jinjin had already tried his best to remember that strange feeling when the mutation occurred. But this did not allow him to actively sense the crystal core in his heart. It was as if there was no such thing at all. Jinjin subconsciously placed his palm on his left chest, feeling his heartbeat, and frowned. No, I did sense it at that time. There is indeed something similar to a magic crystal growing in my heart. It seems to be in harmony with my heart. Why can't I sense it? I clearly sensed it before. Why, what exactly is missing? Zhenjin fell into deep thought. He really wanted to find a way to use the crystal core. Now that he was unable to use his Do Qi, this mutation could instantly increase his battle strength, which was very helpful to him. During the first mutation, he killed the silver magic beast, the blade spider. At that time, he felt the strange flow of his blood. The second time, he killed the black steel rat with a flying dagger. Not only did he feel the flow of his blood, but he also further sensed the mysterious crystal core in his heart. It was the formless energy that was emitted from the crystal core that flowed into his blood. It flowed through his entire body and finally into his arm. So, my previous guess was wrong. The real reason is not the blood, but this magic crystal. This power is neither Do Qi nor magic. It's really amazing. Zhenjin sighed. He then tried to analyze these two experiences. Based on my current attempts, I have no way to initiate the mutation. In that case, what exactly triggered this ability in these two mutations? What is the common point of these two mutations? The first time, when I was on the brink of death, the missing memories emerged. My emotions were very complicated and agitated. The second time, when I was facing the black steel rat, I was afraid of its electric shock, so I felt nervous and faced the threat of death. The biggest similarity between these two experiences was that Zhenjin faced the threat of death. Therefore, all kinds of emotions, such as nervousness, anxiety, fear, determination, killing intent, etc. If it was emotional stimulation that led to the mutation, then, if I continue to be stimulated, will I be able to master the ability to initiate the mutation? Zhenjin's thoughts diverged. After the two mutations, he had obvious improvements. The first time, he only sensed the blood flow. The second time, he went deep into his heart and found the mysterious crystal core. And the last time, it was the claws, but this time, it's the arm. Zhenjin guessed that the mutation seemed to be based on his subconscious, forming the most advantageous situation at that time. Can I control this mutation ability and transform into whatever I want in the future? If I completely transform, will I be in the form of a monkey-tail brown bear? Also, I found that, after the mutation, the bloody light of the crystal core obviously weakened a lot. How many more mutations can it support me? Zhenjin began to look deeper. Along with this process, some of the doubts in his heart were eliminated, but more were added. Chapter 44. According to Zhenjin's plan, the exploration team had to rest for 2 more days. It took a lot of effort to build this camp, and it would be a waste if they didn't make good use of it. The surroundings were cleared again, and the flying rats were hunted. The only threat was gone, so it was very safe. The bodies of the flying rats needed to be processed. The archery of the members of the exploration team also needed to be practiced hard. In addition, they had used up a lot of arrows and a small number of short bows in the previous hunt, and they all needed to be replenished. The hunt was a great success, and the situation of the entire exploration team was greatly improved. Now, Zhenjin had enough time to build better long-range weapons. However, after thorough consideration, Zhenjin rationally gave up on this idea. The next day, Sangsu met Zhenjin. Lord Zhenjin, I have good news. I've made a new discovery. Zhenjin knew that Sangsu was studying the body of the black iron head rat. Did you find a magic crystal in the body of the rat? Sangsu shook his head with a smile. This black iron head rat doesn't have a magic crystal, and the magic power in its body is also very mixed. Soon after it died, the magic power dissipated. Zhenjin muttered, "The black iron head rat doesn't have a magic crystal, but I do have one in my body." Sangsu didn't keep him in suspense and said frankly, "It's like this, my lord. I cut open the stomach of the black iron head rat and found that it had just eaten a full meal before it died. Therefore, there is still a lot of food in its stomach that hasn't been digested, including meat, bones, feathers, fruits, grass, and so on. Among them, I also found a kind of potato. Zhenjin's eyes flashed slightly. It seems that this kind of flying rat is omnivorous. We can try to dig up this kind of potato. Song Su nodded. My lord, it's not just the potato. I speculate that there may be a lot of food stored in the nest of the flying rat. Why do you think so? Asked Zhenjin. Through the previous dissection, as well as the recent research on these rat corpses, I found that their digestive ability is very strong. Their gastric juices can even slightly corrode sword. Generally speaking, when these creatures with strong digestive abilities were hungry, their gastric acid secretion would make it very difficult for them to endure. In order to resist this hunger, they would swallow things that were temporarily difficult to digest, such as stones and so on. However, these flying squirrels did not have such a thing in their stomach. This means that they have plenty of food. We've basically scouted the surroundings. I believe that not only are these flying squirrels omnivorous, but they also have the ability to store food like squirrels. Normally, they would explore everywhere and search for food. When they are unable to endure the hunger, they can eat quickly to prevent the entire race from being driven mad by hunger. Very good. Zhenjin patted Song Su's shoulder to express his appreciation. I'll leave this matter to Lan Zhao. Sir, please allow me to follow you. I am very interested in the specific structure of the flying squirrel nest. Song Su made a small request at the right time. Sure. Zhenjin agreed without any hesitation. Although more manpower was needed to protect this old scholar, ever since Zhenjin came into contact with Song Su, he had repeatedly received help from the old scholar. If the situation allowed, Zhenjin did not mind satisfying the old scholar's desire for knowledge. When Song Su returned to the camp, he had a satisfied expression on his face. Their harvest also gave Jin Zhen a pleasant surprise. Just as Song Su had guessed, the flying squirrel nest was indeed stocked with food. Moreover, the food storage was very large. So much so that when the exploration team members searched the house, many of them sighed. These flying squirrels were living better lives than humans. Although most of the food could not be eaten by humans. However, the amount of potatoes, tree fruits, and so on was equivalent to 1/3 of the flying squirrel meat. This was a great supplement to the exploration team's food. ZD had also made some new progress in her research. Using the gastric juices of the flying squirrels, ZD created many corrosive acid agent. After iron swords were stained with this agent, they would be unrecognizable in a few breaths. As long as there was enough agent, a large hole would be corroded in the soil in just a few breaths. If combined with an atomizing agent, it could create a strong corrosive acid mist. If an ordinary person was exposed to it, their lungs would die after just breathing for a moment. Although the hunting of the flying squirrels was a great success, it consumed the only combustion-promoting agent in ZD's hands. This corrosive agent became a supplement, giving the exploration team an additional means to fight against the enemy. Of course, whether it was the flaming agent from before or the corrosive acid agent now, they were not magic potions. They only used, purified, and strengthened the original physical properties of the materials. The effect of magic potions was more obvious. However, on this island, low-level magic potions were ineffective. There was no progress in the field of acupuncture. He could only temporarily give up his original train of thought and change his direction. He began to think, how did the mysterious crystal core in his heart come about? Is it a potion? This was the answer that Zhenjin thought was most likely. Otherwise, why were these two mutations related to the monkey-tailed brown bear? As night fell, Zhenjin called ZD and once again asked indirectly about the situation at that time. ZD's answer did not give Zhenjin any new gains. Jin Zhen is lost in thought. If ZD had an accident when she was saving me and formed this crystal core, then it would have been impossible for her to escape. Then, when I took the potion, it might trigger the crystal core again and cause a mutation. What's going on? Or do you think there are any hidden dangers? ZD asked. Nothing, I just want to understand. Zhen Jin smiled and comforted ZD. It's getting late, we have to set off tomorrow. Go back and have a good rest. ZD nodded, her eyes shining. Lord Zhenjin, with you, I believe we will be able to leave this island. Zhen Jin nodded. Not only do we have to leave this island, but we also have to do our best to win people's hearts and gather some people to form a preliminary team. Otherwise, when we come to White Sand City, it will only be the two of us, and it will be difficult to compete with the other two for the position of City Lord. Don't blame yourself, ZD. In fact, you have done very well this time. ZD was slightly stunned and laughed bitterly. My lord, your eyes are really sharp. To be honest, I hate the environment here. This place is too unfriendly to mages. The only thing I can help you with is potions, but the current conditions are too simple. If I had some alchemy tools, I believe I could have concocted a poison against the flying squirrels in time. Zhen Jin sighed. That's the truth. We have been reduced to this strange island, surrounded by danger. We are trying to survive, and anything can happen. We just need to do our best, and that's all we can do. Good night. Good night. ZD left. Zhen Jin still didn't tell ZD the truth. On the one hand, Zhen Jin didn't want ZD to bear more worry, and she was already blaming herself. Although they had only known each other for a short time, Zhen Jin found that this purple-eyed girl had a pride in her heart. For such a person, Zhen Jin only needed to comfort, and didn't need to reprimand or whip her. This was because she didn't need any external pressure, and this kind of person could work hard on her own. On the other hand, Zhen Jin also knew ZD's strength in the field of potions. Even if he exposed the truth, ZD didn't have the ability to solve this problem. Since he had hidden it from ZD the first time, Zhen Jin didn't mind hiding it a second time. In Zhen Jin's view, the ability of the mysterious crystal core was a trump card that could allow him to deal with dangerous situations and strong enemies. But at the same time, it also had a huge hidden danger. Is this mutation harmful or not? How can a person's heart have a crystal core? Will this kind of external organ be repelled by other tissues in the body? What kind of damage will a sudden mutation cause to me? Will it be a physical disability or a bloodline disorder? I can't sense the crystal core, and the mutation is not under control. Could it be because the crystal core has just grown and hasn't completely merged with my body? If the mutation happens too many times, will it turn me into a beast and make me lose all my humanity? It wasn't just his body and bloodline, but also the entire exploration team. Zhen Jin knew that the reason why he could lead this group of people was because he was strong. Firstly, it was because he was strong enough. Secondly, it was because of his identity. He was a noble, and more importantly, he was a holy knight. The latter identity was more inspiring than the former. If Zhen Jin's mutation was discovered and he was regarded as a monster, then the advantage brought by this identity would be greatly weakened. Although the hunting of the rats was successful, Zhen Jin knew that this success was only reining in the horse at the edge of the cliff and pulling the exploration team back from the edge of destruction. The following journey would definitely encounter difficulties and obstacles. It was hard to say whether the exploration team could cope with these hardships and tests. Zhen Jin didn't want the hearts of this small team to waver. Therefore, he chose to suppress this secret in his heart and prevent the possibility of it spreading from the source. Late at night in the forest, it was not peaceful. The howls of wild beasts were often heard. These sounds were strange. Some were indeed howling, some were whimpering, and some were like dry cough. Zhen Jin knew that he needed to rest well. After all, he had to set off early the next morning. However, he lay on the mattress and couldn't fall asleep for a while. He simply summarized the results of his thinking these days. At present, it seems that there are three major possibilities for triggering the mutation of the body. The first is the pressure of being on the verge of death, triggering the instinctive reaction of the crystal core in my heart. The second is that, under great pressure, I have all kinds of intense emotions. The third is the blood-based medicine. The heart crystal core is very likely caused by the medicine. Although the two mutations didn't absorb the external medicine, there may still be remnants in the body. Zhen Jin sighed faintly. Although he thought of a lot, the current situation made him not dare to try any of the possibilities. On the one hand, he didn't have a guarantee of safety. On the other hand, he shouldered responsibilities and couldn't easily take risks. He had to lead the entire exploration team, protect his fiancée, and revitalize the 100 Needles family. He had a lot of things to do. In addition, after the mutation, the heart crystal core will consume a lot of magic. After that, I will have a very strong sense of emptiness and exhaustion. Full of thoughts, Zhen Jin drowsily fell asleep. After falling asleep, the young man's eyebrows were still slightly wrinkled, as if he was thinking hard in his dream. After an unknown amount of time, suddenly with a bang, the whole tent collapsed. Zhen Jin was the first to wake up. Although he was sleeping in the camp, he still kept a vigilant heart, so he quickly reacted. Why did the tent suddenly collapse? What happened? Zhen Jin picked up the spider blade that was placed beside him and waved it fiercely. The sharp blade easily cut open the collapsed tent, allowing Zhen Jin to observe everything outside. The next moment, his body and mind shook, and his face showed a look of horror. Chapter 45. The strong wind roared in his ears, like a herd of beasts roaring in unison. The sand that filled the sky was swept up by the strong wind, slapping Zhen Jin's face like knives. The huge wind pulled in all directions, sometimes left and sometimes right, sometimes up and sometimes down. It was difficult for ordinary people to stand still. Zhen Jin's feet were no longer solid grass, but sand. There was sand all over the ground. Sand was also flying in the air. The lush forest was completely gone. This was a desert in the middle of the night. In the desert, the strong wind roared, and sand flew all over the sky. The exploration team members in the camp let out panicked cries. Zhen Jin was stunned for a moment, and then he reacted. His heart was shocked, and two words appeared in his mind: teleportation. The teleportation has been activated again. This time, we have all been teleported to the desert. When Zhen Jin experienced the first teleportation, he was being chased by a swarm of poisonous fire bees. After the teleportation was activated, he was teleported from the rainforest to the forest, indirectly saving his life. This was the second teleportation he had experienced. Just like the first time, it was silent. There was no sign before the teleportation. But this time, Zhen Jin's luck was too bad. Not only was he teleported to the desert, but he also happened to encounter a sandstorm. We have to gather everyone. Zhen Jin opened his mouth to call out, but his mouth was immediately filled with sand. Zhen Jin had no choice but to cover his mouth and shout, but his shout was covered by the wind. The wind became stronger. The sand hit Zhen Jin's body, and waves of numb and slight pain kept coming. The bad weather became terrifying. Sandstorm? Realizing this, Zhen Jin's heart instantly fell to the bottom. "Zd, wait for me." He had no choice but to stop shouting and run forward according to his memory. With a whoosh, a tent flew towards Zhen Jin along with the wind cover. It was like a gray ghost monster pouncing down from above in the dark night. With a wave of his hand, Zhen Jin's extremely sharp blade cut the tent into two halves. The two halves flew past Zhen Jin's body from the left and right, and were immediately swept away by the strong wind and disappeared without a trace. The tents in these camps were all fixed to the ground with wooden stake. However, after they were teleported over, the stakes that were originally deeply embedded in the soil were scattered on the surface of the desert. Without any support, the tent collapsed and was swept away by the strong wind. Oh no! Zhen Jin cursed inwardly. After a while, he realized that he couldn't determine the correct direction at all. First of all, when they were teleported here, there was no point of reference to distinguish north from south in the middle of the night. Secondly, the tents were flying everywhere, and the original layout of the camp had changed beyond recognition. Finally, they couldn't rely on shouting to contact the other team members in the sandstorm. Zhen Jin was also at a loss for a moment. Moreover, in just a few short breaths, the wind had doubled. "Save me!" Zhen Jin heard a weak cry for help coming from above his head. He raised his head abruptly and saw a black shadow flashing above his head. Zhen Jin immediately realized that one of the exploration team members had been blown away by the hurricane. The wind increased and became very terrifying. It could easily blow an adult away. Zhen Jin subconsciously stretched out his arm, but in the blink of an eye, the exploration team member who was crying for help disappeared into the sandstorm. It was too late. ZD is the lightest. Her situation is too dangerous. Zhen Jin thought of this and couldn't help but feel anxious. ZD, where are you now? As if responding to Zhen Jin's strong inner voice, a white light suddenly lit up in the sandstorm on his left front. The white light was like a fire, burning fiercely in his dim vision. On this island, low-level magic and battle chi were prohibited. According to Zhen Jin's understanding of the exploration team, this white flame could only be produced by a potion. And the location of the white flame was obviously ZD's true location. Smart. Zhen Jin couldn't help but praise in his heart. He immediately stared at the location of the white flame and ran. It was very strenuous for him to run. The terrifying wind could blow an adult away. However, Zhen Jin was a battle chi cultivator after all. Although he couldn't use battle chi now, his battle chi cultivation made his physical fitness extraordinary. Under such circumstances, Zhen Jin could still barely resist the wind. However, as he gradually approached, the white flame suddenly dissipated. Is the potion ineffective? ZD, wait for me. Zhen Jin's head shook slightly, and he became more and more anxious. He continued to take a few steps forward. With a whoosh, a huge object seemed to be attacking him in the dim vision. The youth hurriedly lowered his head to avoid this object. It turned out to be a rather large tree trunk. There were indeed some tree trunks stored in the camp, which were left over from making short bows and so on. The tree trunk was far heavier than an adult, but now it was easily swept away by the strong wind. Zhen Jin couldn't run anymore. He had to stomp down hard with every step he took, until his feet were submerged in the sand, until his ankles were submerged. Only then could he resist the wind. What troubled him more was not the hurricane, but the sand that came whistling in the wind. These sand hit Zhen Jin's body and face, bringing about an obvious synesthesia. Zhen Jin couldn't open his eyes completely to avoid being blinded. He could only squint a little to observe. The surroundings became even darker. There was no trace of light. He couldn't even see his fingers if he stretched out his hand. Zhen Jin could only move forward based on his memory. He had no confidence in whether the direction was correct or not. The power of nature was so vast and majestic. At this moment, the youth deeply felt how small he was. As time passed, Zhen Jin's heart turned cold. I've walked at least 100 steps, but I still haven't found ZD. Has she been swept away by the strong wind, or have I unconsciously gone in the wrong direction? God, Xingming Emperor, what should I do? Hesitation and blankness, like a cloud of black smoke, choked the youth's nose and eyes. And in the youth's chest, there seemed to be a burning flame. That was the flame of anger, unwillingness, and hatred. I've already controlled the exploration team. It's not easy to hunt successfully and have enough food for the time being. In the blink of an eye, it has become like this. Am I supposed to die on this island? Should I just watch the people who are close to me die one by one? Is the fall of the 100 Needles family in front of me? No! How can I let this happen? The youth was filled with righteous indignation and tried his best. However, that formless fate was like a high and mighty godly king in the heavens. Occasionally, when it saw a needle, it was like it had discovered a rebellious ant. Fate would extend its mountain-like finger and press down. Zhenjin wanted to raise his head, but his head was getting lower and lower. Zhenjin wanted to straighten his body, but he had to bend down and bend his body to move forward slowly. Zhenjin wanted to stare angrily, wanted to shout or scream, but he could only move forward with his eyes closed in the roaring darkness. The wind was still rapidly increasing. Soon, it became so big that Zhenjin had to resist it with all his strength. The youth sadly realized that at this moment, he could no longer save anyone, because his own life was in imminent danger. He wanted to urge his fighting power, but he still failed. He wanted to mutate again, but no matter how crazily he tried, he couldn't sense the crystal core in his heart. He didn't succeed. Helplessly, he could only pray to God. My great Xingming Emperor, you are a walking God. Now your believer is in a desperate situation, and the glory of the nights is about to be drowned by the wind and sand. Please listen, please take pity on me and help me get out of this predicament, so that I can continue to follow your path and show your power. But God didn't respond. The youth was angry. The youth struggled. The youth was sad. The youth struggled. The youth was exhausted and eventually fell unconscious. It was an endless darkness. A mysterious bestial roar caused the young man to regain a trace of consciousness. Where am I? Where is this? Who am I? It was darkness. No one answered him. There was only endless darkness. Wait, I think I just heard the roar of a beast? Immediately, the youth gradually remembered his identity as a Templar knight and a noble. His name was Zhenjin, his fiancée Zd, the dangerous island, the exploration team, the midnight teleportation, the violent and terrifying sandstorm. Along with this process, the youth's consciousness fully recovered, and he finally woke up completely. Then, he felt a heavy pressure, squeezing his whole body from all directions, making it difficult for him to breathe. So, I'm afraid I'm buried in the sand? Horror naturally crept into his heart. No one would be willing to be buried alive like this. Zhenjin became extremely nervous, but he didn't immediately open his eyes, nor did he rush to get up. Instead, he calmly sensed. His fighting power cultivation didn't just make him stronger than others, it also made him more perceptive. He could see farther and clearer than others, and hear more and more carefully than others. Although he couldn't see now, and the loudest sound he could hear was his heartbeat, he could feel which direction the pressure was stronger. Then, he gathered all his strength and struggled with his limbs. He struggled with all his might. He struggled with all his might, because the youth knew that this was his last chance to survive. Chapter 46. A Sea of Yellow Sand. It was silent and windless. The sun hung high in the sky, wantonly spreading boundless heat and light. The sand dunes were connected to each other, rising and falling like unique tombstones. And at the back of a sand dune, there was suddenly a rustling sound of sand rolling down. This movement became louder and louder, and then a hand suddenly shot out from the stirring yellow sand. This hand was covered in blood and bruises. It suddenly grabbed empty air, and seemed to be stunned for a moment. Then, in the next moment, the hand seemed to react, excitedly and crazily grabbing and scratching. First, it was the palm, then the arm. Sand gushed out, and the hole in the sand quickly expanded, finally revealing a young man's head. When this dusty head was half out of the sand dune, he desperately opened his mouth, as wide as possible, weakly exhaling all the stuffiness in his chest, and then greedily inhaling the scorching hot air. Accompanied by violent breathing, a small amount of sand was ejected from the young man's mouth and nose. Cough, cough, cough. Then, because the breathing was too violent, the young man coughed violently. After coughing for a while, the young man finally recovered and opened his eyes. Even though he was behind the dark sand dune, his pupils still shrank from the scorching sun, and he subconsciously narrowed his eyes into slits. Seeing the surrounding environment clearly, the young man's heart sank even though he had expected it. Desert, I really am in a desert. But I don't know if this desert is the same as the one Tsang Su and the others went to before? The young man was Zhen Jin. He had almost suffocated to death. When he took the first breath of air, the most dangerous moment was finally over. Zhen Jin panted for a moment, recovered a little strength, and pulled himself out of the yellow sand with difficulty. After officially escaping the predicament of being buried alive, Zhen Jin did not have the strength to stand up, and directly knelt on the ground, gasping for breath and coughing loudly at intervals. He spat. The sand in his mouth dyed his saliva a light yellow. He picked his ears, snorted, and then shook his hair with his hands, scattering the fine sand everywhere. These movements only lasted for a short while before Zhen Jin felt that his physical strength had reached its limit. He was so scared that he immediately stopped and went from a full kneeling position to a half-kneeling position. Because he knew how dangerous this island was, it was absolutely stupid to exhaust all of his physical strength. Besides, the half-kneeling action would allow him to get up quickly. The surroundings were completely silent. There was not even a hint of wind. The bright sunlight was scorching hot, baking the yellowish-brown desert. The desert, on the other hand, was plain and unremarkable. There was only yellow in sight, not a single trace of green. The only impurity was him. This golden-haired youth was no longer as handsome as he used to be, nor was he clean. His face was covered in dirt, and he was in an extremely sorry state. Zhen Jin watched everything in front of him with extreme vigilance. However, he didn't make any movements. He scanned his surroundings and finally fixed his gaze on the sand dune behind him. He looked at the sand dune and felt like he was looking at a silent tombstone. Zhen Jin was both scared and relieved. Although he was buried deep under the sand, he was not directly under the sand dune. He was not buried too deeply, which gave him a chance to escape. He tightly grasped this chance and didn't die under the sand dune tombstone. Therefore, the youth couldn't help but laugh. Ha 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 ha. Cough cough, ha ha ha. He had already escaped danger for a while. When he confirmed that he was safe, his heart started to surge with joy. This feeling of joy grew stronger and stronger. In the next few breaths, it was so strong that it filled the youth's chest. Zhen Jin's laughter grew louder and louder. He even laughed until tears came out. He once again felt the beauty of life. He felt the preciousness of every breath. Just now, in the sand, he couldn't breathe at all. He felt that his body was numb and in pain. There were injuries in some places, and at least one of his ribs was broken. This caused Zhen Jin's chest to rise and fall with pain when he breathed. But it was this pain that made him extremely happy. This was the joy of surviving a disaster. The joy of being alive was simply endless. It was like a huge wave set off by a tsunami that wanted to drown him. In fact, Zhen Jin had already experienced this feeling of surviving a disaster many times. The first time, strictly speaking, was when he had just woken up. Zhen Jin's battle consciousness had helped him indirectly kill the silver-level magical beast Blue Wolf. Everything happened too quickly. Of course, after the event, Zhen Jin also felt all kinds of emotions, but there were more feelings of relief and fear than joy. The second time was in the cave. Zhen Jin had already been poisoned by the fire poison, but he risked his life to kill the silver-level magical beast Monkey-tail Brown Bear. Zhen Jin was almost dead. ZD tried her best to save him. Struggling between life and death, Zhen Jin fainted and woke up several times. In the end, he survived. At that time, he discovered that even an ordinary wild flower was full of life's infinite cuteness and beauty. He could appreciate it for a long time. The third time was when he faced the blade spider. As death approached, Zhen Jin's attention was still attracted by the sudden emergence of memories. Zhen Jin also thought that he was going to die. He did not expect his body to suddenly mutate. After surviving this calamity, he was more suspicious and curious than anything else. The fourth time was when the mutton's chaotic magic invaded his body and almost killed him. After being saved, the youth's heart was more grateful and appreciative of his fiancée ZD. The fifth time was the disaster before his eyes. After narrowly escaping death, Zhen Jin's joy was the greatest ever. Why is it? Zhen Jin carefully tasted his own emotions. Soon, he found the reason. It's because this ordeal is the power of heaven and earth. If I was poisoned or a magical beast, I would still have the ability to help. But in the face of such a violent sandstorm, what else could I do other than take a beating? It's my fortune to be able to survive. If he had a choice, Zhen Jin would rather face a magical beast than a sandstorm that covered the sky. It was this feeling of powerlessness and helplessness that made his joy after surviving even more intense. My life was hanging by a thread. It's my fortune to be able to survive. What about ZD, Sang-Su and the others? A question surfaced in Zhen Jin's mind, causing the smile on his face to gradually disappear. His emotions comforted him. These people must still be alive. But at the same time, reason coldly told Zhen Jin, these people were probably doomed. If they survived, it was tantamount to a miracle. Zhen Jin could not help but worry, but also feel empty and hopeful. His joy seemed to have suddenly faded. It was so intense just now, but now it disappeared almost instantly without a trace. What followed was unwillingness. Under the leadership of Zhen Jin, the exploration team had finally hunted down a group of rats. They had just gotten a little better when they suffered a fatal blow. It was fear. If he faced the violent sandstorm again, would he have the luck to escape a second time? It was helplessness and confusion. What should he do next? Where should he go? It was heavy. He once swore to himself that he would protect his fiancée well. Now, was ZD alive or dead? If she was dead, where was her body? And as the only heir of the 100 Needles clan, he needed to compete to win the position of the Lord of White Sand City. But now he was trapped on the island, on the verge of death several times. Could he still escape the island alive? Could he still have the opportunity to shoulder the heavy burden of revitalizing the clan? All kinds of emotions tangled together, making Zhen Jin feel that it was difficult to breathe again. At this moment, he felt helpless and weak. He wanted to hold back his tears. He remembered his identity as a knight of the temple, but his tears still fell silently. Instead of wiping away his tears, Zhen Jin watched the tears drip onto the dry sand. He watched the tears soak into the sand and make tiny pits. The tears tried to expand, but the wetness was limited to a very small area. Compared to the vast desert, no, compared to the entire sand dune, these tears were so small, so pitiful. It's like me. Zhen Jin sighed bitterly. He once again prayed from the bottom of his heart. God, my great Xingming Emperor, you are the living God, you are the side of eternal victory. At this moment, your knight, your believer, your child prays for your response, prays for your mercy, prays for you to give me the right direction, to show me the way to bravely move forward. This time, Zhen Jin was long-winded, and the content was unprecedentedly abundant. A highly poisonous desert viper found Zhen Jin, and the poor boy was soon regarded as prey. The desert viper quietly approached, its scales were very close to the color of sand, and its S-shaped movement was not only fast but also silent. When the distance was close, the desert viper suddenly shot out from behind Zhen Jin. But the next moment, Zhen Jin did not look back, but stretched out his hand and caught the viper in midair. The viper's mouth was wide open, and the snake's tongue was stretched out. It struggled madly, but its throat was tightly gripped by Jin Jin's hand. The viper's half-a-meter-long body was tightly wrapped around Jin Jin's arm. But Jin Jin did not move. Whether it was his half-kneeling body or his arm, they were like cast iron. Jin Jin no longer prayed, but quietly listened to the last hiss of the viper's life journey. He was silent and did not raise his head, so when the viper was forcibly strangled to death, it did not see the face of its mortal enemy. The sun rose higher and higher. The surface of the desert was boiling, and the air in the distance was scorched and distorted. A golden-haired boy slowly walked out from the back of the sand dune, like a drop of water flowing into the vast and boundless desert. The boy's face was handsome, but at the moment, his face was covered in dust and his clothes were tattered. On his shoulder was a dead desert viper, as if it was hanging on a chain. This viper was different from the usual ones. Its tail was like a spiral, reminiscent of a metal spring made of goblins. On this godforsaken island, even an ordinary snake looked strange. Jin Jin did not shed any more tears, and his face became expressionless. He knew a truth. God may have mercy, knights may have mercy, and humans may have mercy, but nature did not. Chapter 47. The scorching sunlight was like thousands of sharp arrows, falling from the sky and covering the entire desert. Jin Jin walked under the sunlight and felt like a fish on a heated iron plate. In order to avoid being roasted, he could only try his best to walk away from the sun on the sand dunes. Even so, after walking for a while, he felt a severe physical exhaustion. At the same time, a sense of hunger faintly transmitted to him. Jin Jin licked his lips. His lips were so dry that it was difficult for him to swallow. His mouth was dry. Jin Jin was as silent as iron. He took the initiative to slow down and walk forward while calculating the time. Because he was unconscious, he did not know how much time had passed. But I haven't eaten or drunk anything for at least 1 night and half a day. It's normal to feel hungry and thirsty. Under normal circumstances, a person would definitely be hungry and thirsty if they did not eat for such a long time. Moreover, Jin Jin had experienced a terrifying sandstorm. Going through this ordeal had consumed a lot of his physical and mental strength. The struggle between life and death had also caused a strong impact on his mental state. My only food now is this snake. Jin Jin glanced at the snake corpse on his shoulder and silently thought about his situation. The island was ferocious. To survive in the wild, the situation was very grim. Previously, in the rainforest and forest, Jin Jin had encountered danger several times. Now that he was in the desert, the resources here were very poor. In comparison, the rainforest and forest, which were rich in resources, was simply heaven. Fortunately, during this period, once I have time, I will ask Song Su for advice and know many ways to survive in the desert. Because he did not understand the mechanism of teleportation, Jin Jin had long considered that he might be sent to the desert in the future. For this, he had already made some preparations. It's best if I can find an oasis. I can immediately replenish a lot of water and food. It's also good to encounter a cactus. But I need a specific cactus. According to Song Su, many cactus are inedible and contain poison. Moreover, digging cactus will consume a lot of physical strength and water in the body. If I do it blindly, the gains will not make up for the losses. The exploration team had also been teleported and ended up in the desert. They mainly relied on the food and water they brought with them. In this regard, Jin Jin was not unprepared. Every day, he would carry a certain amount of food and water with him. Even when he slept in his tent at night, he would place food, water, weapons, and other important survival resources beside him. For the exploration team led by Jin Jin, the teleportation was silent and irresistible. The life forms or items around the teleported life form would also be teleported. Therefore, the entire expedition team had been sent into the desert together, and they did not leave behind their clothes, equipment, and so on. This time, the entire camp that Zhen Jin had ordered to be built was teleported over. However, no one had expected that after teleporting to the desert, they would be shrouded in a violent sandstorm. At that time, after Zhen Jin was awakened, he only wanted to save people. He just grabbed a saber and ran out of the tent. Therefore, the food and water in the tents were all swept away and buried by the wind and sand. Zhen Jin did not even have time to wear his original leather armor, and the weapon made of the spider's blade and spider's leg was only left with the one in his hand. Fortunately, even if I was unconscious, I still held on to the weapon tightly and did not let go. At least, I did not fall into the predicament of being unarmed again. But my food and water are basically gone. I should replenish these reserves. Without them, I can't live at all. An invisible pressure silently accumulated in the young man's heart. And soon, this pressure became stronger and stronger, as if there was a huge rock on his heart, and it was getting heavier and heavier. Zhen Jin's breathing became shorter and shorter. This was definitely not just because of the scorching air in the desert, nor was it just because his physical strength was constantly declining. Surviving alone is completely different from before. The young man sighed deeply in his heart. He could not help but slowly stop in his tracks, stopping in the dark of a dune. He held his knees with both hands, giving himself a chance to breathe. How long had it been? Surviving alone had already made him feel that his entire body was slowly and involuntarily becoming nervous. A thick sense of loneliness firmly wrapped around him. He could not rely on anyone, and could not rely on anyone. He could only rely on himself. It was as if he was the only person left in the world, as if the entire human race had died out. He had to face all the difficulties and dangers alone. Perhaps I'll die here. My flesh will be eaten by predators, leaving only white bones behind. I'll suffer the scorching sun of day and the cold of night in the desolate desert. In the end, I'll be ground into pieces by the wind and sand, completely disappearing from this vast and cold world. Such similar thoughts constantly appeared in Zhen Jin's mind. No matter how he tried to restrain himself, he could not stop. Traces of panic spread in his heart, and quickly expanded. Zhen Jin gritted his teeth, revealing a bitter smile. Song Su had once warned him. According to his research, humans were actually social animals. From the deepest part of their bodies, they needed the company of others. Once a person survived alone, especially when faced with the enormous pressure of surviving in the wild, it was easy for them to become nervous and panic. If not controlled, negative emotions would become a fatal killer. Even if there was enough food and water, and the surrounding environment was safe enough, it would still cause people to be unable to control their emotions, have a mental breakdown, have hallucinations, and become crazy. Now that the youth had experienced it himself, he recalled Song Su's theory, and immediately had a very deep understanding. Calm down, don't panic. Zhen Jin forced himself to calm down, but to no avail. God, my great emperor, you have the name of the sage. Your believer is here to pray to you. Please grant me the strength of my heart, so that I will no longer be weak and no longer panic. Let me bravely follow the path you have shown me, and let your name be known. He prayed to his God again, but the result did not surprise him at all. His God did not respond. He simply sat down on the sand. He looked at the endless desert, watching the monotonous yellow spread out and finally mixed with the blue sky. The scorching sun caused the air to distort crazily. The youth suddenly felt that the entire desert was like an incurable madman who appeared calm on the surface. Here, sooner or later, he would be melted and driven mad. Zhen Jin, oh Zhen Jin, how did you fall into this situation? How could you fall into this situation? You are the only heir of the 100 Needles family, you are the fiancé of Miss ZD, and you are here now? The youth angrily questioned himself. The situation was so bad that he could not even protect himself. But what could he do? Facing these self-blame, he could only remain silent. After a long time, the silent youth exhaled a mouthful of turbid air and said to himself, "Indeed, there is nothing worse than now, right?" Then, he smiled bitterly. In fact, he himself found it strange that he could actually laugh under such circumstances. With this smile, the anger and panic in his heart dissipated a little, and a new feeling of sadness, helplessness, and self-mockery was added. Then, miraculously, the youth, who was full of complicated emotions, slowly calmed down. Zhenjin, who calmed down, looked around, and immediately realized that he had made a huge mistake before. He had paid too much attention to food and water before. He had randomly chosen a direction to go. In this desert, he was simply seeking his own death. Perhaps he had been too nervous at that time, so this emotion filled his mind. He did not think much, and his body was forced to act directly. I should have found the right direction and kept it all the time. Without direction, my journey is likely to turn into a huge circle in the desert, which is worse than going around in the same place. It was noon in the daytime, and there were no stars or moon at night to guide the way. But Zhenjin had mastered another way, which was the way to identify the direction. He had asked Sang Su for advice. First, he inserted a stick into the ground, and made a mark on the top of the stick's shadow on the ground. About 10 minutes later, he made another mark on the stick's shadow after the deviation. After the two marks were connected into a line, the perpendicular of the line was the north-south direction. As for which end of the bottom line was north or south, it depended on the position of the sun. At the position of the sun, the end of the perpendicular was south, and the other end was north. Zhenjin did not know the topographic map of this island, but he clearly remembered that when the exploration team was teleported to the desert, Sang Su had chosen the south direction. Therefore, without any other basis for judgment, he could only take a gamble this time and choose the south direction. Once again, Zhenjin tried his best to avoid the sun and walked behind the sand dunes. His speed decreased again and again, trying his best to conserve his strength. Many times, he took the initiative to stop and rest. "I have to conserve my strength. Trekking in the desert during the day will consume a lot of strength. More importantly, after the body sweats, a lot of water will be consumed. The more you sweat, the closer you are to death." This was the precious knowledge that Zhenjin had learned when he and Sang Su communicated. When Zhenjin remained calm, loneliness and the pressure of survival were also stimulating him, making his mind more agile and clear-headed. He recalled what Huang Zhao had said when he was communicating with her. "At that time, I had just boarded the ship and was still a newbie. At the beginning, it was very difficult to endure. I worked on the deck all day and had a lot of work. I quickly got sunburned. At first, it was just an itch. I couldn't help but scratch it with my nails. Later, my skin and flesh became stinging, forming blisters that were tightly pressed together. I started to have a low fever, and my head was heavy all day. I could only lie weakly in the hammock every day. Then, the low fever became a high fever, and I started to stink. The other sailors didn't dare to approach me. Someone even suggested to the captain to throw me away, thinking that I had an epidemic and would infect others. Fortunately, my brother got some herbs from the local natives of the island when the ship docked. This herb was said to be made from sea mud and local leaves. After applying it, there was a cool feeling. It was very magical. In the end, I endured it. From then on, I didn't dare to underestimate the most ordinary sunlight. I also maintained the purest respect for these ancient medicines. When Zhenjin thought of this, he took off the outermost layer of clothes and tried to wrap it around his head. He was glad that his underwear was long-sleeved and long pants, which left him with very little exposed skin under the sun. Although my strength and physical fitness far exceed Huang Zhao's, This is not Phoenix Desert, and the possibility of sunburn is very low. But by doing so, I can maintain as much water in my body as possible. P.S. I recommend a good book. I am a killer of no feelings. The excellent writing of a great God. I am a killer of pigeons. I have no feelings. I also have no money. I am E. Hijo, surnamed E., the man who is proficient in half of the 4 great inventions. I don't want to talk to you, and I threw a BNG at you. Chapter 48. In the afternoon, the sun was not as hot as it was at noon, but it was still unbearable. A young man was slowly climbing to the top of a low sand dune. He was climbing from the back of the sand dune, clearly intending to climb over it. In his hand was a sword with a wooden hilt and a strange blade, full of a crude feeling. The young man was using the long sword as a crutch to help him move forward. The young man's figure was thin and not very robust. He was wearing linen underwear, trousers, and long sleeves, but his feet were bare. His head was covered with a layer of clothing, and his nose and mouth were tightly covered, but his eyes were exposed. At the same time, there was also the golden hair on his forehead. It was Zhen. The top of the sand dune was just a few steps away, and when the sun shone, Zhen could not help but squint his eyes. He deliberately exposed his eyes because he knew that he had to maintain a good vision. At the same time, he also used his hearing, smell, and touch to guard against predators that could attack at any time. The sun was very dazzling, and Zhen squinted eyes were still dazzled by the sun's rays. Zhen did not directly go over, but stopped very close to the top of the sand dune, and waited for his eyes to adjust before continuing to climb. Not finding any danger, Zhen stood at the top of the sand dune and looked into the distance. The desert in front of him was flat, unlike the many sand dunes behind him. The young man could not help but sigh. This meant that he would have to trudge through the torture of the sun. The young man's eyes were also very beautiful, with a dark blue color, like the sky after a rain. The confusion in his eyes disappeared in a flash, and then it was replaced by determination. "Keep going," Zhen said to himself. Suddenly, his blue eyes lit up. "There's food!" Having cultivated qi, his body was far stronger than ordinary people. He found that there was a spider not far away, rolling down the sand dune with the wind. Zhen hurried down and caught the spider without much effort. This spider was as big as 2 adult thumbs, and its body was yellowish-brown, similar to the color of the sand, but it was still discovered by Zhen's sharp eyes. The spider had 8 legs, but they were all curled up to form a ball. Then, with the wind, the spider could roll down the sand dune calmly. If he wanted it to walk on its own, it would take a lot more effort. In this barren desert, all life had their own unique survival skills. Saving physical strength was undoubtedly one of the most effective measures. Zhen pinched off the spider's head and shook his hands to shake off the sand on the spider's body. After that, he directly put the spider into his mouth and used his teeth to continuously chew it. After it became very fine, his Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed it completely. Pinching off the little spider's head was to get rid of the poison. Of course, the aura of this little life form was weak. It was a far cry from a bronze-ranked creature. Even if it was poisonous, it would not be able to kill Zhen, who was at least a silver-ranked creature. However, the young man did not want to add any additional burden to his body. The spider didn't taste good. It wasn't roasted or seasoned. Zhen's mouth, throat, and nose were filled with a strange smell. The arthropods of the spider, on the other hand, tasted very simple, like withered branches. Zhen thought about it for a while. This kind of crispness was quite similar to that of other small insects. This little spider was not the first one he had eaten. Along the way, he had also encountered a few others sporadically. There were spiders, scorpions, and some he couldn't name. The spiders had their heads cut off, and the scorpions had their tails cut off. They all went into Zhen Jin's stomach. Every time he ate, he would have the feeling of retching. However, he would never underestimate these little life forms. He knew very well that these little life forms were very important to replenish his water and food. After walking in the desert for half a day, Zhen Jin had already discovered that he did not encounter any edible plant. However, it was easier to find some small life forms. These small life forms had very little meat. The most valuable thing was that they could replenish Zhen Jin's water. Zhen Jin treasured these foods very much. Although these droplets of food were very small, if they accumulated bit by bit, they might be what he relied on to successfully walk out of the desert in the future. If I don't treasure these foods, I might be able to successfully leave this place in the future. But in the end, I fell in the desert. I really hope to encounter a cactus. Zhen Jin sighed. Along the way, he had also encountered some sporadic plants. Unfortunately, there were no cactus. These plants were also small and short. Zhen Jin did not know what species they were or whether they could be eaten. He had tried. After carefully avoiding the needle-like sharp branches and leaves, he found that the roots of the plants were deeply rooted in the desert. Such roots could allow the plants to absorb a little water from the desert's underground, but it also made it difficult for Zhen Jin to dig them out. After Zhen Jin tried, he decisively and wisely chose to give up. Even if he dug them out, the roots of this plant might not be food. Zhen Jin did not know the species of this plant. Many times, he had to calculate the consumption and possible gains, patiently compare the results of the two, and then calmly think about it and make a decision. Obviously, the risk of digging up a plant that he did not know about was too great. In the end, Zhen Jin chose to give up. This choice was actually very difficult. Every time he left a desert plant, Zhen Jin would fall into a kind of doubt. Did I do something wrong? Perhaps this is a special arrangement by God to help me get out of this predicament. But I chose to give up. Zhen Jin felt like he was a student in a college, doing a test that would determine his life and death. He kept answering questions, but no one gave him the correct answer. Time gradually passed, and the sun slowly set in the west. In the evening, the sun was like a rough man who vented his anger through violent fights. At this moment, his curses and beatings were weak, giving people the illusion of gentleness. The temperature in the air also became suitable, but it was still very dry. Zhen Jin began to consciously quicken his pace. He needed to walk as much as possible at this time to make up for his previous losses. When the sun gradually set below the horizon, the afterglow of the setting sun and the sunset on the horizon looked very beautiful. But this kind of beautiful scenery was not appreciated by Zhen Jin at all. He only felt that this was an ultimatum or warning from the sun. Kid, I will let you go for now. Tomorrow, I will continue to torture you. At this time, the temperature of the air dropped rapidly. Zhen Jin began to feel that his clothes were thin, and a strong chill attacked him, making him shiver uncontrollably. The youth could not help but feel his heart sink. The temperature difference in this desert was very big, and it was beyond his previous estimation. For him, this was also a test. Although I can still bear it now, later on, when my body's condition deteriorates, this temperature difference will become a death threat to my neck. This was a possible threat in the future. What the youth wanted to solve the most now was hunger and thirst. The feeling of hunger and thirst was more serious than when he had just woken up. How could the small creatures he found along the way fill Zhen Jin's stomach? In fact, rather than calling it food, it was more like a kind of comfort. Fortunately, Gene Needles did not encounter any powerful predators during the day on the road. But unfortunately, this also meant that he did not have the opportunity to harvest a large amount of food. At this time, his neck was wrapped in a special scarf, which was the corpse of the desert viper that he had killed before. The youth used his fingers to lovingly stroke the snake's scales. From his fingertips came a cold touch, but in his heart, this cold touch turned into a warm feeling. This was the only food left in Zhen Jin's hands, and he had deliberately preserved it. On one hand, as long as it was there, Zhen Jin had hope. On the other hand, Zhen Jin was also vigilant of the risk. Rashly eating a large amount of food would also consume the body's water. As for the fact that the viper was a poisonous snake, that was secondary. The structure of the viper's body determined that its poison gland was in the snake's head. Once the snake's head was pinched off, there was basically no poison left. According to Zhen Jin's physique, even if he was poisoned, he would not be afraid of the poison of this kind of ordinary beast. But it's best to make a fire and roast it. After all, this island is strange and dangerous, it can't be looked at with ordinary eyes. Maybe this kind of snake is poisonous all over? If that's the case, my current situation is tantamount to taking the initiative to put the Grim Reaper's scythe on my neck. When the sun completely disappeared from the horizon, the curtain of night fell. This day has passed. Zhen Jin looked at the deep and vast sky. A sense of loss and panic appeared in his heart. His current situation was very dangerous and difficult. During the day, he hated the sunlight, but it actually gave him a good vision. And now, in the darkness, there would be more predators coming out. Zhen Jin took a few deep breaths, trying to calm down. Then, he happily found that he had really succeeded. With the first trial, he seemed to have made a qualitative leap in stabilizing his state of mind. He did not even need to pray. Now, he could only rely on himself to keep calm. Of course, he also knew the result of praying. As for the Xingming Emperor's response, he did not have much expectation. Late at night, the temperature was very low. From Zhen Jin's mouth and nose began to exhale clouds of white gas. The chill was bone-piercing. The hunger became more and more intense, tormenting the youth. His stomach was already protesting, letting out a growling sound. But compared to hunger, the feeling of thirst was more. Zhen Jin felt that his throat was smoking. If there was a lake, he would want to immerse himself in it, swim and drink to his heart's content. There was too little water. Zhen Jin originally placed his hopes on some desert plants, but this hope was shattered. He did not even see the shadow of a cactus. There was no moon tonight, the sky was full of stars. Zhen Jin looked up at the starry sky, feeling the ruthlessness and indifference of the stars, as if watching him slowly walk towards a dead end. He tried to identify, wanting to rely on the stars to prove his direction, but he failed. In this aspect, he did not dabble in a complete layman. Because of the correct strategy during the day, he still had a lot of stamina left. The youth continued to trudge alone in the desert under the starry night. Unknowingly, a sand dune began to appear beside Zhen Jin. What is that? In his blurred vision, Zhen Jin saw the shadow of a beast entrenched at the waist of the sand dune. Chapter 49. The young man immediately stopped in his tracks, and could not help but take a deep breath. After the initial shock, joy began to spread in his heart. In the middle of the night, his eyes seemed to be shining. Kill it, then take its blood and drink it. I'm really going to die of thirst, Zhen Jin shouted in his heart. But immediately, the joy in his heart faded a little and was replaced by hesitation. From afar, this beast's body is huge. It seems to be lying on the sand, but even so, it's already more than 2 meters tall. It's so far away, yet I can't sense its aura. It seems to be restrained? With such a large body, it won't be easy to survive in the desert. This means that it's very strong. If it's a silver level, no, even if it's a dark iron level magical beast, then I'll be in danger. On this incomparably dangerous isolated island, gold-ranked magical beasts were not rare. Zhen Jin hesitated for a few breaths, then made a decision. He still chose to attack. Because without food and water, his condition would only worsen. The desert was barren and vast, unlike rainforests and forests. If Zhen Jin gave up this opportunity, then how would he be able to find a suitable prey to hunt in the future? The chances of that were not high at all. So, while he still had his stamina, it was more sensible to attack at this time. If I run into danger, I can only hope for a sudden mutation of my ability. Zhen Jin secretly gritted his teeth, bent his back, slowed his pace, and quietly approached the giant beast. In the darkness, the giant beast's body seemed to be curled up into a ball, motionless. When he was close enough, Zhen Jin's expression suddenly changed, his nervousness and vigilance dissipated by half. So it's just a giant rock. Zhen Jin exhales a mouthful of turbid air and slowly approaches the giant beast, he originally thought. Although he had an outstanding physique, he was still human, and his vision was greatly affected at night. If it was a dark elf, it would have seen clearly and would not have caused such a misunderstanding. Zhen Jin sized up the giant rock in front of him. The giant rock was oval-shaped, silently standing in the darkness. The surface of the boulder was vaguely glittering with a metallic luster, but it was full of bumps and hollows, completely insulated from the word smooth. There were countless tiny and dense holes. What was strange was that a warm aura was constantly being emitted from these small pits that were as small as sesame seed. Zhen Jin was stunned for a moment. Song Su's words came back to his mind. Could this be the golden hemp stone? Goldstone was a mixture of iron, gold, earth, and many other minerals. Depending on the place of origin, the composition and ratio of the components in the gold hemp stone would be different. The exploration team had also encountered a large group of golden hemp stones, and Song Su's preliminary inference was that these golden hemp stones contained abundant gold. Unfortunately, in order to extract the gold from the huge and heavy gold hemp stone, a special method was needed. The exploration team did not have the ability to do so. Of course, the most important thing for them was to save themselves. After that, they would find water and food for the camp later. Gold hemp stones usually come in groups, but there's only one here. Zhen Jin stroked the surface of the boulder with his hand, feeling both disappointed and relieved. He was disappointed that there was no harvest of food and water, but he also felt lucky that he could find a piece of golden hemp stone. This kind of boulder was exposed to the sun during the day, absorbing heat and storing it in the heart of the stone. Even in the bone-chilling desert late at night, the golden hemp stone was still very warm. This solved a big problem for Zhen Jin. The clothes on his body looked very thin in the middle of the night. Just now, he was still annoyed that he did not have the materials to make a fire. Now, he did not need to make a fire. He could rely on this boulder to protect himself from the heat and resist the harsh cold. The night passed like this, but when Zhen Jin opened his eyes again, he found that the sun had already appeared on the horizon. It was dawn. Zhen Jin moved his hands and feet a little. He was happy to find that his physical strength had recovered a lot. He had rested well last night. His body was fully rested, and his spirit had calmed down because of the abundant time. What made him feel gratified was that he was not in a deep sleep. Instead, he remained vigilant and his nerves were stretched taut. He had woken up 2 or 3 times during the night because the howling cold wind in the desert was too strong, exceeding the alert level in his heart. After waking up, he quickly fell asleep again. This made him very satisfied. It seems that I have received such training, or had such an experience, to be able to sleep and be vigilant at the same time. Actually, it was not easy to achieve this. Zhen Jin had a new understanding of himself. This time, Zhen Jin woke up because he heard a strange sound again. The sound came from the northeast. The sound is very strange. It seems like there's a snake? The golden hemp stone that Zhen Jin was resting on was located at the waist of the sand dune. Zhen Jin had a thought. He slowed down his steps and carefully approached the top of the sand dune. At the top, he slowly stretched out his head and carefully observed. It was dawn and there was not enough light. The first thing that entered his eyes were pieces of golden hemp stone. There were hundreds of these stones, with different spacing and sizes. They were like chess pieces placed on a chessboard made of sand dune. This undoubtedly confirmed Sang Su's words. Golden hemp stone appeared in pieces. The golden hemp stone that Zhen Jin was resting on was only the outermost piece. Then, Zhen Jin's pupils shrank slightly. He saw two groups of beasts confronting each other in the middle of the golden hemp stone. One group of beasts was a green-skinned lizard, while the other group was a golden-skinned scorpion. The lizard was as big as a warhorse, while the scorpion was slightly smaller. The lizard hissed like a snake, while the scorpion hissed. Both sides were trying to intimidate the other. Zhen Jin was woken up by a mix of these two sounds. Zhen Jin's head tightened. He sensed the life force of these two beasts. The lizard and the scorpion were at least black iron level, while the leader of the group was at least silver level. Not counting the mutation, just one silver level magical beast is enough to pose a fatal threat to me. When the number of black iron magical beasts reaches a certain level, it can also cause me to lose my life. Zhen Jin had not fully explored the theory of mutation. He could not use his qi, his prayers were not answered, and he did not have any armor on him. The only thing that comforted him was the weapon in his hand. But this silver-level weapon was also being worn down over time. The legs of the blade spider were indeed the best material for making weapons, but this material had to be processed to stabilize the magic within and retain its sharpness. And Zhen Jin was just using it. He made it crudely and did not process it at all. As time passed, this spider-foot sword would become weaker and weaker. So, Zhen Jin did not act rashly. He squatted in place and quietly observed. He still did not know why these two groups of beasts were confronting each other. No matter which side it was, he did not want to provoke them. The young man secretly prayed as he peeked. If these two groups of beasts start fighting, it might create an opportunity for me to harvest some food. As if hearing Zhen Jin's prayer, the two groups of beasts finally lost their patience and began to fight. But it was not a large-scale battle. Instead, the leader of the group of beasts pounced into the center of the battlefield alone and began a one-on-one battle. Swoosh! The green lizard let out an extremely unpleasant cry, then opened its mouth and spat out a thick green acid. The acid hit the golden scorpion directly. The golden scorpion immediately used its huge pincers to block in front of itself like a shield, successfully protecting its eyes. Sizzle, white smoke immediately rose from the surface of the golden scorpion's pincers. Zhen Jin narrowed his eyes. He keenly noticed that some of the acid had splashed onto the golden stone. Within a few breaths, the golden stone was corroded into a fist-sized hole. If this was sprayed on my body, without the protection of qi, I'm afraid that after 2 or 3 breaths, I would only be left with bones. What made Zhen Jin feel relieved was that after spitting out this large amount of acid, the lizard leader immediately became dispirited and took the initiative to retreat. Obviously, this kind of acid was not its usual combat method. But as the lizard retreated, the golden scorpion advanced even faster. The two quickly approached each other. The green lizard immediately opened its mouth and let out another strange cry, as if it was going to spit out the green liquid again. But the golden scorpion was even more cunning. It had already raised its pincers and blocked in front of itself. At the same time, it raised its scorpion tail, which was at least 2 meters long, and fiercely stabbed. The scorpion tail was sharp, like the spearhead of a knight's spear. The green lizard's head was directly pierced by the scorpion tail, creating a round hole that reached the brain. This was a fatal wound. After succeeding in its attack, the golden scorpion immediately retreated. It retreated very quickly. From the round hole above the green lizard's head, white brain matter mixed with light green blood spurted out like a fountain. The green lizard leader let out an extremely tragic cry. At the last moment it exploded with a violent attack. The corrosive green liquid in its mouth spewed out again, without any aim, like a green light pillar that swept randomly. The huge gold stone was swept, and immediately thick white smoke rose up, making sizzling sounds, and then melted under the sun like snow. The green lizards of the same race were also affected. The lizards fell into a panic, and the unlucky ones screamed. Some of their legs were corroded, revealing white bones. Some of their eyes were frantically digging into the sand, trying to save themselves. There were also a small number of golden scorpions that were attacked by the green liquid. Their shells quickly softened, and after a few breaths, only the ends of their scorpion tails were left. Silver-level golden scorpions could resist the green liquid, but most of the black iron scorpions could not. Fortunately, the green lizard's outburst only lasted for a few breaths. Soon, the green liquid in its mouth was no longer spewed out. After losing their leader, the green lizards retreated one after another. The golden scorpions won, but they did not pursue the victory as Zhen Jin had predicted. After the golden scorpions chased away the green lizards, they did not even care about their corpses, and surrounded the gold stone in 2s and 3s. Under Zhen Jin's astonished gaze, these golden scorpions first used their scorpion tails to pierce through the gold stone, and then worked together to shatter the huge gold stone. Then, they used their huge pincers to clamp the gold stone scattered on the sand into smaller pieces. Finally, they put these pieces of gold stone into their mouths and chewed continuously. So these gold stones are the golden scorpion's food? Looking at the scene in front of him, Zhen Jin was deep in thought. Zhen Jin could not help but gulp. He looked at these golden scorpions eating in big mouthfuls, and his hunger and thirst were stimulated even more. He waited patiently. The golden scorpions ate for more than half an hour, and finally left noisily, leaving behind a pile of debris. After confirming that it was safe, Zhen Jin rushed back to the original battlefield with excitement. The magical beasts that were shot by the acid and killed could not be eaten. But the leader of the lizards, after spraying out all the acid and losing all its blood and brain matter, still had intact flesh. Zhen Jin used the weapon in his hand to cut open the leader of the lizards, and took the flesh from its body. Zhen Jin had only slept for a while, and after watching a battle, he suddenly had plenty of food. But I still lack water. Will I be lucky enough to encounter such luck again? The young man's excitement and joy gradually calmed down. There was still some residual acid, and Zhen Jin carefully used his weapon to stain it a little. Zhen Jin waited patiently for a while, and found that the silver rank spider blade was still as hard and sharp as ever, and was slightly relieved. At this time, the sun was starting to appear on the horizon, and Zhen Jin's vision became better. The temperature was also starting to rise. Zhen Jin knew that this was a rare opportunity to travel, and was about to set off when his pupils suddenly shrank. This is... A touch of pink appeared in his field of vision, which shocked him greatly. Chapter 50. A group of people was fleeing in the desert. Quick, faster! Keep up, don't fall behind. They're coming! Someone screamed in panic. What followed was a blood-curdling scream. The people at the back of the team could not help but look back and saw that one of their companions had been pushed to the ground by the green lizard. The lizard opened its mouth wide and bit its companion's head. After the green lizard that was eating, another lizard ran out. The lizard exploded with astonishing speed. In the blink of an eye, it was about to pounce on the two people at the back of the team. No! One of them shouted. His heart was filled with fear, but his face revealed a fierce expression. At the critical moment of life and death, he actually reached out and pulled down his companion beside him. His companion was pulled to the ground and could not get up for a moment. He opened his mouth and wanted to curse, but he was killed by the lizard and could only let out a shrill scream. The screams made the hearts of the survivors tighten. One of the girls saw the scene behind her and gritted her teeth. She took out a potion from the leather bag at her waist and sprinkled it into the sky behind her. The potion was like powder, but when it was sprinkled into the air, it immediately turned into a thick green smoke. "Hold your breath," the girl reminded loudly. She was ZD. The surviving companions seemed to be no stranger to this green smoke. They immediately held their breaths and crawled out of the smoke. The green lizards that were chasing after them inhaled the smoke into their noses and lungs because they breathed normally. Soon, these green lizards let out screams. Some struggled in the thick green smoke, and some scurried around. The entire group of lizards that were chasing after them fell into a panic. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the surviving members of the exploration team successfully distanced themselves from these lizards. "Quick, run. We're going to succeed. Lady ZD is really amazing. It's all thanks to your potion. Is there more? Hurry up and sprinkle more." Everyone shouted and shouted. The joy of escaping from a desperate situation filled everyone's hearts. "How can you do this? I just saw it. You killed your companion." Baya's questioning was particularly ear-piercing in the cheers. The person who was criticized by him first looked ashamed, but soon became angry and scolded. "Get lost, mind your own business." "You." Baya was tongue-tied and shocked. The person who was criticized looked agitated. His good temper was completely gone, as if he had become a different person. "All right, we're not out of danger yet. Everything that happens here will be decided by the Lord Jinjin." An old man spoke in a timely manner, stabilizing the group. He was Tsang Su. At the same time, in the northeast direction of this surviving team, there was a sand dune. Two heads popped out from the sand dune. Their faces were similar. They were the brothers Lan Zhao and Huang Zhao. "Big brother, I found them!" Zhuang Zhao was very excited, but immediately restrained her excitement. "They are being chased by green lizards." "They really are here." Lan Zhao nodded. "Why don't I see Lord Jinjin? I'm afraid they've been separated and haven't met up yet." We also discovered the pink markings on these green lizards and followed the tracks of the wild beasts to find this place. Huang Zhao guessed. It turned out that after the exploration team was teleported, they immediately encountered a storm. ZD relied on medicine to quickly melt an underground cave in the sandstorm, helping many of the exploration team members. The underground cave was not secure, and it had collapsed when the sandstorm raged. Unexpectedly, it was connected to another underground cave. In order to survive, everyone could only come to this underground cave. In the end, they found that this underground cave in the desert was not naturally formed. It was a group of green lizards that created the underground cave. The exploration team members were no strangers to these green lizards. They had encountered them after being teleported to the desert. The place where ZD and the others arrived was the most important place in the lizard's underground lair. The nursery. A large number of lizard eggs were stored in the nursery, and there were female lizards guarding them. After the two sides met, they immediately started fighting. There were only two female lizards. Under the effect of ZD's medicine, they were quickly killed by the exploration team members. However, such a movement attracted the attention of the other green lizards, who immediately launched a crazy revenge attack on the exploration team members. Fortunately, the entrance of the nursery was very narrow, so everyone defended it. The green lizards were endless, and the exploration team began to suffer casualties. Tsang Su learned through autopsy that the green lizards did not go into estrus frequently, and each female lizard only gave birth to one egg each. However, there were so many lizard eggs in the cave, so it was natural to judge that the group of lizards outside was very large. There was no doubt that there was no way out if they stayed here. After realizing this, everyone began to plan to break out of the encirclement. During this time, ZD sprinkled pink medicine on the lizards, hoping that it would send a signal. As for now, they had already broken out of the encirclement and temporarily escaped the pursuit of the lizards. "Let's go and meet up with them quickly," Lan Zhao said and was about to leave. However, the next moment, his arm was grabbed by his younger brother, Huang Zhao. No, brother, look. Following the direction of Huang Zhao's finger, Lan Zhao saw a large number of green lizards. They were blocking in front of ZD and Sang Su. However, ZD and Sang Su did not know that their vision was blocked by a sand dune. Bystanders saw the real battle clearly, and Lan Zhao and Huang Zhao discovered it. Not good, they're going to be surrounded by lizards. If this goes on, they'll definitely die. We have to warn them quickly. Lan Zhao's expression changed drastically. Wait! Huang Zhao stopped him again. What are you doing? Lan Zhao glared at him. Saving people is more important. Huang Zhao said, Don't be silly, brother. These people are dead for sure. Look again. Lan Zhao took a closer look and his face turned pale. He realized that not only was there a large group of lizards in front of the exploration team, but there were also groups of lizards on their left and right side. Even so, Lan Zhao's body swayed and he gritted his teeth, but was interrupted by Huang Zhao. The Lord Jinjin is not here, and they're only relying on Miss ZD's medicine to struggle. There's no hope of survival. Don't be silly, brother. Even with the two of us, we're just going to die. Huang Zhao's expression was cold. Then he asked, Who are they to you? Are they worth your life? But we're slaves now, and we've discussed before that we're going to follow the Lord Jinjin together, right? Lan Zhao hesitated. Huang Zhao's face darkened. Slaves. I don't want to be a slave. The previous situation was because I had no choice. Besides, we don't even know where the Lord Jinjin is now. Since he's not here, he won't know what happened here in the future. Aren't we following the Lord Jinjin for a good future? It's not our intention to die like this. But, Lan Zhao's expression wavered. I have to at least warn them. Don't do that. Huang Zhao shook his head. It's too late. They've already been surrounded. If you open your mouth and let them find us, they'll definitely ask us to support them. When the time comes, should we go or not? If we go, we'll die. If we don't go, they'll definitely hold a grudge against us. Maybe they'll use some method to record this matter. In the future, the Lord Jinjin will find their relics, and it's very likely that he'll know the secret of us not saving them. This is too bad for us. Lan Zhao didn't reply. He just looked at the exploration team members in the distance. These people's faces were still full of joy, and they didn't know that they were in a desperate situation. Lan Zhao's frown deepened. His hands subconsciously grabbed 2 handfuls of sand, and his fists clenched tightly. Seeing Lan Zhao like this, Huang Zhao's heart skipped a beat. He knew his brother very well. Therefore, Huang Zhao shouted in a low voice, Do you want me to die, brother? What? Lan Zhao was stunned. I know that these people have helped you before. Even the Lord Jinjin and Miss ZD saved my life. You don't want to owe them anything. You want to repay their kindness. You must be thinking if you should let me go and support them alone. Huang Zhao's words stabbed Lan Zhao's heart. Lan Zhao was indeed thinking so. But then, Huang Zhao said, If you go, you'll definitely die. How am I supposed to survive in this desert all by myself? Besides, how could I just watch you throw your life away without doing anything? You're my biological brother. If you go, I'll definitely follow behind you. If you die, my life will be lost too. Brother. Lan Zhao gritted his teeth and stared at Huang Zhao. Brother. Huang Zhao also stared back, not showing any weakness. Have you forgotten Mother's last words? You swore that you'd take care of me for the rest of your life. You swore that even if you die, you'd die before me. Now, if you go support them, you'll be sending me to my death. Yes, I swore. I've been taking care of you since you were young, haven't I? But you're already grown up. You're a seasoned seaman, and you're even at the black iron rank. But so what? In the spider forest, I was still abandoned by you. Huang Zhao mercilessly interrupted Lan Zhao. I thought you were dead at that time. Lan Zhao roared. His face was red from anger. Huang Zhao sneered. If I die, it might be a good thing for you, isn't it? After all, it was you who killed father. If I die, who will know your secret? You'll be free. No. How can you think like that? Lan Zhao let out a painful howl. His face was distorted, and the veins on his forehead were bulging. Huang Zhao's voice suddenly rose. Then let's go. We'll leave this place together. We'll escape from this damned island together. You have to prove yourself with your actions. Huang Zhao's words were like a spear made of ice, directly stabbing into the deepest part of Lan Zhao's heart. This strong man half knelt on the ground, staring at his brother. He didn't move for a long time, like a statue. The two brothers stared at each other like this for a few breaths. Then, they were disturbed by the movements of the green lizards. Huang Zhao saw a few green lizards rushing towards the sand dune they were on. He hurriedly urged, let's go. If we don't go now, we won't be able to escape. He immediately got up and pulled Lan Zhao with all his strength. At first, he didn't pull, but Huang Zhao tried 2 more times. Finally, he pulled Lan Zhao up and ran down the sand dune, escaping from this place. At the last moment of their retreat, Lan Zhao looked back. He saw that the exploration team had already discovered their situation. They stopped in their tracks, obviously in a panic. He let out a deep sigh in his heart, lowered his head, and escaped with Huang Zhao side by side. Chapter 51. We're finished. There are these green-skinned beasts everywhere. What should we do? We can't leave. Sang Su panted heavily. At this moment, the old man's face was no longer calm. Seeing that there were more and more green lizards around them, the exploration team members fell into despair. Many of them roared. This is impossible. Lord Sang Su, didn't you say that these green lizards would go out to look for food in the morning? It's precisely because of this that we chose to break out of the encirclement. The group of lizards in front of us is the main force that is looking for food. But they came back too early. It's useless to say this now. We can retreat to the underground cave from before. We can't retreat. Instead of this, we might as well take the risk and charge forward. Are you crazy? These green lizards in front are the strongest among the beasts. Otherwise, why would they go out to hunt? Sang Su was silent. ZD gritted her teeth. Let's climb this dune first. With that, she took the lead and moved. Although they were in a desperate situation, their survival instinct drove everyone to follow ZD. The exploration team climbed the dune, and the green lizards followed closely behind. Every time these green lizards approached, ZD would throw out a bag of powder and scatter it, forming a thick green smoke to block the lizard. Although the green smoke would continue to spread and quickly dilute, no longer obstructing the lizards, the exploration team still successfully climbed to the top of the dune. Then, everyone became even more desperate. They looked down from above and could see very clearly. The dune was surrounded by densely packed green lizards. There were 2,000 to 3,000 of them. Most of them were ordinary wild beasts. The lizards that stayed around the nest were basically old, weak, sick, and disabled. The most elite were the ones that had gone out to hunt and returned early. Almost all of them had the life aura of black iron level. What are you still struggling for? You might as well wait for death here. Some people even collapsed on the sofa. Rather than being eaten by these green lizards, I might as well die in the sandstorm. Someone smiled bitterly. The lizards gathered under the dune, becoming denser and denser. Soon, another lizard rushed up the sand dune. ZD took out some medicinal powder and sprinkled it on the ground. Immediately, a thick green fog was created. Clouds of mist formed a temporary wall, repelling the lizards that came to invade. Seeing this scene, Baya praised sincerely, "If it weren't for Lady ZD, we would have died long ago." Someone saw that ZD's pouch was filled with bags of medicine. His eyes lit up and he suggested, "With so many medicines, we can wait for a strong wind and scatter these bags of medicine in the wind to completely kill these lizards. Even if we can't kill them, we can still carve out a path." ZD shook her head. "With the wind, the smoke won't be able to gather together and will quickly disperse. Moreover, the lizards were not stupid. They would turn around and run when they encountered the green smoke. Most importantly, we are more fragile than these lizards. The green smoke is even more harmful to us." Everyone was dumbfounded. "Then what do we do?" ZD sighed and looked at the green lizards around the dune. "We can only hope that these lizards won't be able to attack for a long time and will disperse on their own." What the girl was looking forward to did not happen. The lizards maintained their encirclement and kept trying to attack the dune, although they were repelled by the green fog every time. ZD would replenish the green fog in a timely manner whenever the green fog was thinner. This special powder was being consumed rapidly. Although ZD had made a lot of it, at this speed, it would be completely used up in a day or two. Seeing the green lizards hissing and screaming but unable to kill their way up the dune, many of the exploration team members relaxed. Sang-soo and ZD, however, were worried. They knew very well that the situation in front of them was actually very dangerous. These lizards were only scared away by the green fog. The green fog covered a limited area. If they charged desperately, they could still charge up. In fact, as long as these lizards held their breaths, they could also charge through the green fog. However, they were wild beasts after all. They did not have the intelligence of humans and did not know how to be flexible. Time passed, and the sun climbed higher and higher. It was noon. Sang-soo saw that the lizards were all lying under the dune lazily. Among them, the powerful lizards occupied the shade of the dune. The old scholar frowned deeply and said his guess. "I reckon that these lizards won't give up on killing us. I've already observed that there are no silver-level lizards among these lizards. This is basically impossible. To maintain such a large group of beasts, there needs to be at least a silver-level lizard leader. Look at those lizards again. They are the strongest among the lizards, and they all have the aura of black iron. However, almost all of these magical beasts are injured, and many of their injuries are quite serious. I'm guessing that this batch of hunting lizards encountered a strong enemy in the morning. Not only did they not find any food, but they were also hunted down. They suffered heavy losses, and even their leader lost his life." ZD suddenly understood. "So, we are the only food in the eyes of these lizards?" Sang-soo nodded and then shook his head slightly. "That's not all. We also destroyed those lizard eggs. The smell of those eggs has been lingering on our bodies. These lizards hate us to the core. I'm afraid that even if we escape to the end of the desert, they will chase us there and tear us, the murderers of their descendants, to pieces." Everyone was silent. Baya couldn't help but complain on behalf of ZD. "But if we didn't destroy those lizard eggs, without the egg liquid as the ingredient, Lady ZD wouldn't have been able to make these powders. Without these, we would have died long ago. How could we still be alive?" Sang-soo shook his head. "I definitely don't mean to criticize Lady ZD. In fact, I am very grateful to her. I'm just telling everyone what I know." Everyone fell silent again. There wasn't even a trace of wind. The sunlight was like thousands of arrows shooting down. The temperature in the air became very high, and the people exposed at the top of the dune found it more and more difficult to endure. They were like fish caught on a red-hot iron plate. They were really going to be roasted. Many people took off their outer clothes and used them as small tents, propping them up above their heads. They didn't dare to sit down because the sand under their feet was extremely hot. At this moment, if a lizard egg was broken and fell on it, it would immediately be steamed and beaten. If only we had enough bows and arrows. Standing on the dune and looking down from above, we could totally shoot these lizards. Let these lizards become our food, someone muttered. But unfortunately, almost all the short bows and arrows made by the exploration team were lost in the sandstorm. Only half of the exploration team members were left. Not everyone had a weapon, and even fewer people carried a short bow with them. This was the desert, and there was no wood for them to make. It was Lord Jinjin's idea to make short bows. I wonder where the knight is? If he's here, he might be able to think of a way, someone said. Jinjin had led everyone to victory and led the exploration team out of the survival crisis. His prestige had already reached the hearts of everyone. So at this moment, everyone looked forward to a wise and powerful leader like him. Baya looked into the distance. I don't think Lord Jinjin will die so easily. He is only temporarily separated from us. He will definitely appear and come here to save us. Baya's tone was full of certainty, which made everyone feel quite strange. So, someone asked, why do you say that? Can you contact Lord Jinjin? Baya shook his head and widened his eyes. With a trace of doubt on his face, he said matter-of-factly, because Jinjin is a knight and a Templar knight. He will definitely come back and take us out. Because this is a knight. Everyone smiled bitterly. Sang-Soo shook his head slightly. After interacting with Baya for a long time, everyone could tell. This young man seemed to have an inexplicable trust and respect for knights. This level of trust and respect was far beyond ordinary, so much so that it seemed a little naive and stupid. But at this time, no one wanted to use common sense to refute this naivety and stupidity. This was because they, who were in a desperate situation, were also looking forward to such a knight who would stand up for them when they were at their most helpless and dangerous, using his superb ability and wisdom to help them, the weak, out of danger. After this short conversation, there was a long silence. The extremely dazzling sunlight was extremely domineering, making it almost impossible for people to lift their eyelid. They could only lower their heads to look at the sand under their feet. Everyone was hungry and thirsty, and many people's lips were dry and cracked. Although there was food and water, there was not much. Under Sang-Soo's suggestion, they had already begun to limit the supply. Huh! One of the exploration team members suddenly looked surprised and then quickly rubbed his eyes. After confirming again, he shouted, "Come and look, is there a person over there?" This voice immediately attracted everyone's attention. There is a person. Who is it? I can't see clearly yet. He's running towards us. Sang-Soo narrowed his eyes. The foot of the dune is attracted by the green skin, and this person is still rushing over. It's obvious that he's bold. It's the Lord Jinjin. It must be him, Baya shouted excitedly. As the distance got closer and closer, everyone could finally recognize the person's face. Immediately, cheers rang out. It's the Lord. It's indeed the Lord Jinjin. I was right, wasn't I? Baya laughed loudly. Lord Jinjin, we're here. Have you finally come to save us? Many people could not help but cry tears of joy at this moment. Zidi's breathing also quickened. Her crystal-like eyes were filled with surprise and anticipation. But soon, the girl frowned slightly and her heart tightened. Ah, he's injured. The expressions of the excited crowd also changed. They also noticed that Jinjin, who was rushing over, had his left arm hanging. It seemed to be broken. At the same time, his body was wrapped in bandages. These bandages were obviously long strips of cloth that Jinjin had torn from his clothes. The Lord is actually injured. That sandstorm was indeed too terrifying. I wonder if the Lord's injury is serious? The exploration team members were all on tenterhook. After all, Jinjin's condition was directly related to everyone's death at this moment. Of course, the lizards also noticed Jinjin rushing over. Soon, several lizards from the outermost circle charged at Jinjin. Jinjin held the spider blade in his right hand and did not dodge. He rushed into the middle of these lizards and slashed left and right. After the blade light slashed past, green blood would splatter out. These ordinary lizards were all beheaded and died on the sand. Zhen Jin's slaughter immediately caused a riot among the lizards. More lizards charged at him. This time, it was not just ordinary lizards, but also bronze-level magical beasts. Zhen Jin's momentum was immediately reduced by a lot. Bronze-level lizards were not only bigger and stronger, but more importantly, they spat acid more rapidly. Ordinary lizards, once they wanted to spit acid, would stay in place, their necks would thicken, and after about 2 breaths, they would open their mouths to spit green liquid. This time was completely enough for Zhen Jin to complete the counterattack. In Zhen Jin's opinion, if ordinary lizards wanted to spit acid, it was a good time to attack. The bronze lizard only needed a breath to prepare to spit acid. If it was a one-on-one battle, this time was enough for Zhen Jin to dodge and counterattack. But the current situation was that Zhen Jin was alone, and there were more than a dozen lizards besieging him. It was impossible for him to choose the most perfect dodge path, where he could dodge and approach and then counterattack. I must not touch this acid. Zhen Jin was as calm as ice. The acid of a bronze-level lizard could also quickly corrode the gold stone. Zhen Jin did not have any fighting aura to protect his body at the moment, nor did he have any armor on his body. If he was hit by the acid, he would be seriously injured immediately. Lord Zhen Jin, it seems that the injuries on the Lord's body have a great impact on him. The Lord is constantly dodging. Could it be that he can't use his fighting aura to protect his body? At the top of the dune, everyone looked into the distance. The battle situation in front of them gradually made their hearts tighten. Suddenly, someone cried out in alarm and subconsciously shouted, "Be careful!" It turned out that among the besieging lizards, one of them was very sinister and actually spat acid. The acid attacked Zhen Jin's back. But in the next moment, Zhen Jin seemed to have heard the cry of the exploration team members. Without looking back, he rolled on the ground and perfectly dodged the acid. The other lizards also hurriedly dodged. The acid missed and the liquid fell on the sand, immediately making a sizzling sound. A shallow groove was corroded in the sand, and pungent white smoke rose. It seems that I've undergone a lot of similar training in the past, so I have enough combat experience. Now I'm facing this kind of siege alone, and I'm calm and at ease. At this moment, Zhen Jin's understanding of himself deepened. Even though he could only see in front of him, when he was surrounded and intercepted, he could always see several dodging paths. His vision was not limited to the front, but as he moved and dodged, his gaze constantly swept quickly, and his ears were also listening to the sound of the wind. Therefore, even if the acid shot from behind him, he could still dodge in time. Of course, this was also because the speed of the acid's flying was not as fast as a normal arrow. The exploration team members did not know Zhen Jin's confidence. Seeing the young knight being surrounded and in danger, they were all frightened. They felt that Zhen Jin was walking on a tightrope on the edge of a cliff. As long as he's hit by this acid, Lord Zhen Jin will be in danger. He's injured, but he still risked his life to rush over to save us. This is a holy knight. Lord Zhen Jin, just as he said, he has never given up on us. Other than being worried, the exploration team members were even more touched. We want to support the Lord. But we only have short bows and the distance is too far. We can't shoot the lizards beside the Lord at all, and we can't provide him with any help. The exploration team members gritted their teeth. The range of long-range weapons was divided into maximum range and effective range. The effective range was mid-range and long-range weapons had lethality, and the maximum range was only the farthest place they could shoot. The short bows were crudely made, and whether it was the effective range or the maximum range, they could not reach Zhen Jin's position. The exploration team members were trapped at the top of the dune. For a moment, they could only watch helplessly. Oh no! Everyone's expressions darkened again. they saw a third group of lizards rushing towards Jinjin. Among this group of green lizards, there were 3 black iron-level lizards. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.